Okay, gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to Shiur number 11 out of 16. This is becoming very exciting as we progress. There were 2 points I wanted to mention from last week's Shiur, some unfinished business, so to speak. One is a very interesting comment of the Maram Mintz that is brought down by the Nesekalim. If you remember, we were discussing last week about the tipus chalav that fell on a kedera mibachutz. So we learned what's the din, and then what's the minig, and then what's shasad chak. So the din, so we pass on like the smak, and we differentiate between it fell keneged harativ, shalei keneged harativ. And then the mechaber brings down his minig to be even more machmer than what the din is. And then we brought down Siv Zayin to Siv Hey Vav Zayin. It brought down the shasad chak. You can be gar mekel. As long as you have shishim, doesn't matter where it fell. So Maram Min says, if you have a matir in such a case, whether it's let's say Rech Shabbos or Rech whatever the case of the Shasad Chak is in that particular case, that you should explain to the people why it is you're allowing it. Because since it's a milsa t'miyah, they know in another case it was like this, and then this case you said like this, so the people just get very confused, or they lose trust or confidence, whatever the case is. And this, I think, is a heira klalis in whether it's paskaning halachas, or the hanagat tziburis, or even interpersonal relationships, and even within the family, that it's very important, especially if exception is made in a certain case, or two apparently identical cases of being treated differently, that one should explain why it is that they are being treated differently because of the different circumstances in the two different cases. So it's mentioned over here in this last din that we learned. I think it has a broader application here. There was okay. So let's go on to Sif Ches. We have in today's Shiur. I mean, I didn't exactly line everything up to check whether the statement I'm about to make is 100% accurate. But in terms of applicability and common day shilas that come up, I think today's Shiur covers some of the most important broad-ranging issues that come up. Okay, so it's true, we'll get to Tzadik Hey, we'll get to Nat Barnat, perhaps it's more, but we have a very, very wide-ranging series of topics that we're going to cover today. And the way they split it up, it's I first looked at it, I thought it was quite original. I'm thinking about it, I think it's a it's the Oiska Halton where they broke it up. Some of it is just in terms of covering material and how much quantity one could cover, and part of it is thematically based. So we're going to be learning pieces of 3 different simanim today. We have 2 sifim left from the Siman Tzadik base, Sif Ches and Tes. Then we have the entire Siman Tzadik Gimel, which is only 1 sif. Happens to be a very long sif, or a long Ramah, with many important dinim in it. And that begins the first entire Siman that we're dealing with the inyan of Kalim, the Bli and the Kali, if something's absorbed in the Kali. And then Tzadik Dalid, which is dealing with the inyan of a kaf, sticking a spoon into a pot. So one would logically start with Sif Aleph base, but we're going to do the Gimel Dalit because it relates to the subject of Siman Tzadik Gimel. It's actually a Hashlama continuation, and gives the relevant dinim that are expressed there. So we're going to have from Tzadik base, I'll just tell you 3 primary inyanim that we're going to be covering. Is that we have the concept of steam. That's going to be in Sif Ches. What is the halachic status of Zayah. Steam. Is it treated like the food itself? Is it not treated like the food itself? And this, as we will discuss, has very, very broad application. And then we'll, at the end of that, the Ramah puts in, almost parenthetically, discussion of the din of Shtei Kedera Shnei Gezu Bezu, which is again more in Hilchas Taruvas, discussed more Baruch, but it does become relevant over here, and we'll discuss that some. It's a very applicable din. And then in Tzadik Gimel, Tzadik Gal, we'll be discussing the din of Neisen Tam Lev Gam. What's the difference between a keli before 24 hours has passed since the absorption and after 24 hours. So we're going to be covering a wide range of issues. I would just like to point out, sort of repeat in a certain way, but two inyanim that we discussed last time. One, to keep in mind, this whole concept of tipus chalav, that even though it fell on the Kedera Mibachutz, that we are at least Mishum Safek, and then we had a whole discussion, the approach of the Shach, the approach of the Tas, that it's penetrating through the entire width of the Keli. In general, at least we have to be Cheshesh, we're Supik, we're not sure. So even though it's on the outside, we have to treat this Keli as if it's full of Tam. And the taste, we know Tam Ke'ikir, we paskin, learn later on in Ilchas Taruvas, Machlekes HaPoskim, but Lamaisa we say the Tam Ke'ikir is Midiaraisa. So even though you cannot see anything on the surface of the Keli looks clean, but nevertheless we know that the Tam is there, and therefore it'll prohibit something that comes out, and that prohibition is Midiaraisa. I'm going to point out something else, and it's going to come up later, just to mention. You remember we had the Inyan in Nira Kisa, and we had the Tipus Chalav earlier in Tzadik Beis, and it fell on a chaticha, it fell on a piece of meat. So then we said that if you covered the pot or you stirred the pot, so then you can be mitzdaref the entire pot in order to nullify that bit of milk, b'shishim. What happens when you do kisun, that you cover the kedera? What exactly are you accomplishing with covering the kedera? So by covering the kedera, putting the cover on, so what's happening is everything is mixing up inside, because there's moisture coming up from the kedera and it's coming to the kisui. So what's there is coming up and it's coming down, and everything is getting all mixed up. So it's as if the whole thing is being mixed together. Now, it's going to be a little relevant later on too, but sort of an introduction to this whole concept of steam, because what's going up into the kisui kedera, what is exactly going up into that cover? Is it splashing? Is it mamashas of liquid? There's marak, there's soup spilling over there. There's moisture that's coming out, and what exactly is the status of that moisture? And there are those that compare in general the din of steam that we're going to be learning now in Sifches to that general inyan. Without further ado, let's jump into this Sifches that we had before. So what's the case? This is from a tshuva of the Rosh, is the source for this. We don't know any place where this was discussed directly in the Gemara, although we have a Mishnah Machshirim, and the Poskim compared to the Mishnah Machshirim, which is talking about Tumah Batara, that you have a pot, and it's speaking over there in the Mishnah. Let's say you have a pot, Shebana Beis HaMikdash, we have to learn Hilchos the Mashiach, especially in the 3 weeks. So it says in days of Chizkiyahu Melech, he couldn't find the man, woman, a child from the north to the south of Eretz Yisrael that wasn't expert in laws of Tumah Batara. So we have laws of Tumah Batara. So let's say you have some truma, cooking up a pot of truma. Let's say a simple case, Aisha's Kain, she's cooking up a pot of truma. So the pot is tar, and the truma is obviously tar. And then what happened? The woman has tumas yodayim, her hands are tummy, and she stirs the pot, and some steam comes up from the pot and hits her hand. So according to the Mishnah, we have a problem. We have a problem. What exactly is the problem? There's a whole discussion. Rambam, different Rishonim, what exactly is it mamash or chibur? What exactly is happening over here? But one thing is for sure is that we have a problem. Now, question number one is that we extrapolate from Lo Tumah Batara to the case of Isurim. And the Rosh says yes. Now, do we take all the details of that case and import it to our case, or not necessarily? Well, let's say, what's the basic deal? So, Machaber brings down Machve Shel Cholov. You have a pan which is full of milk. Shenosna Bekira Tachas Kedera Shel Bosor. And you put it in the same oven underneath a pot of meat. And Hazeya Eila Benivla Kedera, the Zeya, the steam that's coming off of the milk in the bottom machvas is going to go up and be absorbed in the pot, which is on top of it, basarta, and it's going to prohibit it, which is also, just by the way, an extension of the law we learned before, but tipus challah falling on the kederim mebachutz, because this is also falling mebachutz. It's underneath, and you could say heat rises, okay, but it's still coming mebachutz, and now it's not even a tipa of chalav, it's zeyas chalav, which is coming up. So here's a case. Okay, so this is a modern sort of kira, not exactly what the Rosh is speaking about, but we get the idea. So you have over there on top a kedera shel basar, and then you put underneath a kedera shel chalav. So what's going to happen? We got steam, which is coming out of the bottom one into the top one, and it's going to answer it. And we see it's coming from the outside of the kedera. Now it's coming from the bottom, so it's obviously keneged hareitiv. So you're going to be able to use shishim to be mevatel, but if you don't have shishim, then it's going to become aser, in spite of the fact it came from the outside, which we already know from the previous three halachas. Hevav Zayin, we're all speaking about that. But in addition, over here, it's not even mamash chalav that's falling on the pot; it's zayas chalav. Yeah, so it says vasarta. So the Ramah explains imhoya chalav b'machvas, and if there was milk inside that pot in the bottom, bayin shishim b'tapshul shebegedera neged the chalav sheb'machvas. So they're going to need shishim in the kedera against the entire amount of chalav. So it's going to answer it, but what exactly do you need? Is that you need shishim, and you're going to measure against all the chalav because you don't know exactly how much is being absorbed. Fine. But the Ramah adds three limitations, or if you want to put it, definitions to this din. Number one, call the ma'irish machmas magur. Number one, the machmas is referring, it uses two different words. You use machmas to refer to the milk on the bottom and kedera to refer to the meat on top. So first of all, it's only if the bottom pot is not covered. Okay, machmas tachnan magula, then it has to be open, has to be uncovered. That's number one. If it was closed, as we'll soon see some details about that. If it was closed, so then we're going to say the zayah didn't escape, and there's no reason to prohibit the kedera shel basar. Number two, hazayah eila min hamaychal atzmi, the kedera shel Allah, that the zayah is coming from the food. It's not just a milk pot; it's milk mamish that's coming up. So that's the second condition. But if it was just a milk pot that was water cooking inside of it, the vegetables or whatever else that was cooking inside it, there's no proof from this din. Is there a problem there? Okay, we can discuss that. Well, not we'll get that some tzaddik. There might be some problems there, but this problem, direct problem, it's not being addressed over here in this halacha. This is talking about a case where the milk itself, the zayah from the milk itself is going to be absorbed. And number three, that it's a case that's close enough. Shayad, Seiledis, Bezeya, Bamakam, Shenageya, Pekadera. The place where the milk contacts the Kedera, right at that point of contact is Yad Seiledis. Avalim ein yatsa ledis bezeya hakol shari, but there's no yatsa ledis, then everything's okay. That's the third condition. Zeya and a gas pesir elyon or sachas. That the zeya is hot. I mean, what kind of statement is that? Zeya is always hot. I mean, how else would it become zeya if it didn't become hot? You heated up the milk until it evaporated and turned to the zeya. Pshat is that the zeya, as it goes up, so if it's in a closed area, we'll soon mention something about that later on, but from the Bach. But in general, we say that it is possible. Let's say we have a stovetop. Over here, it's inside an oven. But let's say it would be, you have a kira also, sometimes you put the pot on top. So when the zay is coming off the pot on top, let's say you're cooking up soup on your stovetop, and there's steam that's coming up. So if you put your hand right over the pot, so obviously it's hot, you can get burned, very, very hot. But you move your hand up, and it's not so hot. It's going to reach a certain point that is no longer yatzaledis. The point where it's no longer yatzaledis, so at that point you no longer have this problem of zayah being absorbed. So this is very negeya. We'll be talking about later on. It's a little bit not exactly the same case, but they're very closely related. That when you have a hood, which is to pull out the steam from which is hanging over your stovetop, and you have them even closer in industrial kitchens where there could be very, very low hanging and very, very close to the pot. So if you have it, which is very, very high up, so then by the time the steam reaches that hood, so it's already dissipated in the air, it might even be there altogether. And if it did reach, it's already cooled off to the extent it's no longer yatzaledis. So like you could have a lot of humidity, and it's not yatzaledis, it's not hot, but not yatzaledis. So once it reaches the point that it's not hot anymore, so the Ramah says it's not going to have the kayach to aser anything. Yeah. And then the Ramah brings an interesting case. To us, this looks very strange, but it's evidently something that people did. They were drying out pieces of meat. So why were they drying out pieces of meat? So as we discussed in the past, we have to understand people lived in a different manner in those days. They didn't have refrigerations. You had to preserve the meat. So one of the ways is through smoking, another way is through salting, another way is through drying it out. So how are you going to dry it out? So you need some heat. So you're going to, and it's normally over a long period of time, and it's a low heat, otherwise you burn the whole thing. So one of the ways they would do it, they're cooking a pot anyway, there's some heat over there, so they would hang the meat on top of the milk. So in this picture, it looks like it's dangerously close to the milk. And it would seem from this picture, for example, that it's already yatzaledis, and then you're going to certainly have a problem. Even if it was a kedera, if the meat was in a keli, it would be a problem. Over here, the mamish meat open to the steam coming out from the milk, and for sure is a problem. But if it's not yatzaledis, it's far enough up that it's not going to be yatzaledis. It's taka warm, and there's some heat enough that over the long term it's going to dry out this piece of meat to preserve it. But if it's not yatzaledis, we're not worried. That is the din that the Ramah paskins. Shame. So it's not going to answer it, but the Achreinim point out that even though it's not yatzaledis, the fact that it's hanging over a pot that moisture is coming out of, some of that moisture might stick to the meat, and over here the moisture is milk. It's coming from milk. Therefore, so you have to do adacha. You have to rinse off the meat because of that liquid, that even though it wasn't absorbed to the extent that it's going to transform it into bas b'chalav, nevertheless, you still have to take off the mamashes, and the way you get off that mamashes is through hadacha. Now, a very common question that is raised, and which is relevant to this din, is what about salt shakers and things for spices, things of this nature? So if you have a salt shaker, And let's say in the place where let's say this piece of meat in the picture is too low and it's too close that it would aser, that the steam over there is yatzaleh display. So according to that, let's say it would not be a piece of meat hanging over the boiling milk. It would be a salt shaker. So you take a salt shaker and you put some salt into the pot. So what happens to the salt shaker? So if it's yatzaleh display in the place of the salt shaker, so then you have milchik salt. Okay, if it gets inside the holes, you want to say that you have a cover so that it prevents it from going inside. Steam can get in through the holes to get inside. So then we say that that even if it was a keli, it's going to answer all the food in the keli. It's going to answer the keli. It's going to answer the food. Or we treat it like tipus chalav keneged aretiv, that it's like it fell straight into the pot. So if that went through a keli, so it's not going to go through the salt shaker with holes. So if you're using it so close that it's yatzaleh display, so then that becomes an issue. Then you're going to take that salt and you're going to want to put into something fleshik, so you might have a problem. So there's some people ask, is the chumrah, is it? So it all depends how you use it. So if it's being used even occasionally in a place where it's yatzaleh this way, then you have a mamish, a serious halachic problem. You use a separate salt shake for each one. What about spices? So you have houses where they have spice racks. You got 20 different types of spices, 30, who knows how many different types of spices. You can get one whole set for milchik, one whole set for fleshik. So the push the eitzah is that you take it. Oh, I have to hit my mute button. Thank you for reminding me. So the push the eitzah is you take some of the spice and you put it in your hand and then you put it inside. Now, what's with your hand? If your hand was belay from last time, it's yatzaleh display. Anyway, living things not belay. So your hands, it's living flesh. So it doesn't. It's not belay. You put it inside and you put it in. You don't
have to be worried that your hands are dirty.
And if your hands are, if you're cooking milchik with fleshliks at the same time, then you definitely do have a problem. And that we discussed back in Siman Peiches.
No, I'm saying if your hands are dirty, you're going to make the salt dirty. If your hands are dirty,
let's say it's a milchik meifel you're making over here, and you have some milchiks on your hand. So what's the problem? You're pouring some cinnamon, who knows? Take some cinnamon, you pour it onto your hand. So your hand is milchik, but your milchik, your hand is not a klirishon. It's not the source of heat. So what you're going to have zayah coming off of the milk into the container of cinnamon. It's not going to make a problem. And if your hand is fleshik, then you can't have a problem working with the milk. You have to wash your hands. So theoretically, could there be spices? So it depends. It depends how you use it. Your taka have to be careful. Should be careful that it shouldn't be used in a place which is yatzaleh display. If you do use it in a location where it's yatzaleh display, it's a halachic issue. And that's why salt shakers, which are used, salt is used much more commonly than other spices. It's the most houses. So that's why to have separate salt shakers for the milchik and fleshik is standard operating equipment in a kosher kitchen. Because if you lay your mullet, you're gonna be in a situation. Okay, people don't usually put their hands in a place where it's yatzaleh display necessarily. But as we mentioned a few shiurim back, yatzaleh is not so hot. It's not terribly hot. And then people sometimes do things and it's not too hot, but they're just putting the salt in and they're taking it away. So nish gefährlich, so they'll do it. Question?
How does one define yatzaleh?
So it's a big machlekes poskim. It's a whole discussion. It's more for ilchas tarubas, but in degrees, that 40 Celsius, there are many days that say the Torah yatzaleh display. You can have a bli at 40 Celsius. That's, I think, 110 Fahrenheit. It's not very hot. I mean, it sounds hot. If outside it's 110, it's very hot. But, your mouth is 98.6. So, like, baby doesn't burn the thumb when he sucks his thumb. So it's not all that hot. It doesn't mean that it's too hot to touch and you burn your hand. That's not what it means.
The Ramah here is talking about that and says that the Zeya is Eilam and Amaychel Atzmai. What if you have other Zeya in the, let's say you're using like a steamer, and there's other like pots open, or
you know what? Hold your question. We're going to be speaking about some related cases, and we'll see if it becomes clear over there. You might. We're going to speak about steam jackets soon. So maybe if you wouldn't mind holding it, and then we finish the SIF. So if question's not addressed, then bring it up then, okay?
This is all about the pot. Once it gets into once you put it on a plate or any klisheni, could the Zeya aser your salt shaker from your bowl of soup or from your plate of food?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. A klisheni is einam avashul, but then we're talking about bishul. Here you're talking about blias tam. So it doesn't really have to do with whether it's a klirishin or a klisheni. And if it will be cold milk and you pour some inside, it's also going to make a problem. Okay, so it's not going to be bishul. But the problem is you have your mamashas there. V'haraya, we see over there in the case of the meat that it was also not yatzala display, but since there was moisture that went inside, it needs hadacha. Again, it's not even yatzala display, so I don't see any reason to differentiate by klisheni. If the zay is going inside, so then I don't see why it shouldn't be an issue. We're talking over here not about bishul. It's not the din of bishul. We're talking about mamashas. We're talking about blias and mamashas. The main din is talking about blias, but the Indian of hadacha is also talking about mamashas. So I don't see why we wouldn't consider that to be a problem.
Just a quick question. In this case, why is it important that it's an akira? Like, is that just a heichatimsa, or theoretically, even if it's outside of akira and you have the machvas and it's yatzilaris, right, and the zeya is oila, and that even when it reaches the kedera, it would be the same din, no?
Yeah. Okay. So let me just rephrase your question a little bit, because we're going to have a few. It's something which applies to the whole Shulchan Aruch, called Teira Kula, and it applies to this case, and we'll have soon see a machlekes afrein about this. When you have a case, is every last detail of the case precise? So sometimes you have a Shilas and Shuvas, for example. We mentioned before about the Trumas Hadesh, that he wrote the Shilas, so we assume that he wrote in such a way that every detail should be precise. But sometimes it's just this is the most common case. So Ramah is talking about meat hanging over a pot of milk, and if it would be a little different, but Pashas, that's what people did. So that was a common thing to do. And this was evidently also a common thing to do. People are going to put in akira. Why dafka in akira? And what it was in the open air? In the open air, how can I have one thing on top of each other without them sitting on top of each other? So you have a chatsuva over here. You have in the picture, you have our modern oven, but so too in the kira that they had. You know, in the days of the Gemara, so sometimes you put the kira on top. You put the pot on top of the kira. You had an opening on top of you had a clay keli, and then you have the coals, the fire, the wood, whatever, the fuel inside, and then you have a pot inside. Sometimes you put the pot right on top of the coals. Sometimes you have a dreifus, that you have some sort of tripod, whatever, like we have on our stovetops, that you put the pot on top on a gas stove to keep it from sitting inside the coals and becoming dirty or burnt, whatever the case is, so it's sitting on top. So it's very common that you would have a case where you'd have something inside. So you put the machvas inside the kira, tachas kedera shel Bosor, and the kedera shel Bosor was on top of the whole. Because how else are you going to have it? You're going to have it in the open air. How are you going to get the thing on top? What's going to be holding up the top shelf? So you could say the whole thing was lav dafka. That was just the most common case. Or you could say it's mamish dafka. It's only inside a kira. And if it was in the open air, then it doesn't apply. And that's a whole machlekes achreinim. So the Rabbi Kiva Eger brings down a tshuva from the Bach that wants to differentiate between a closed area and an open area. But in general, the Poskim don't accept that differentiation. In other words, it's as if the Bach is saying that when it says over here kira, it's dafka when it's in an enclosed area. And if it wouldn't be in an enclosed area, we don't have this form. But okay, the achreinim don't necessarily accept it. Kivega discusses we start to a suffix, something of the sort. But in any case in halacha, when you're given certain details, so that's part of the medam and milsa lemilsa are the relevant details. When you have certain details change, does that modify what the halacha is, or it's just a detail which doesn't change the halacha? And very often that's a source of machlekes. Okay, let's go further. Oops. Okay, so let's go some details of these three conditions. So we said first of all that it has to have, and the lower one has to have chaluk mamash. So if it was empty, or even if we have a Michael Parva, it's not going to answer it. We're talking about the zeya of the food itself. Even though the tam, let's say the keli was a ben yeme, it was used for milk within the last 24 hours, then you cooked up potatoes in that pot, or you cooked up chveis, being invaded by antivirus. Okay. Let's say you would have parva soup in that pot. So the taste of the keli, the milchika taste is going into the soup. And we say tam ke'ikr. And then the zayah from the parva soup is going up. So then the lav dafka, this whole chumrah applies. This whole discussion whether it's or not, but pashtus, from the way we're learning now, at least up until this point, it doesn't apply. The Rosh is not talking about that chumrah. Okay, so it has to be milk mamish rather than something which is parv. The second tanai is that it has to be open, the bottom pot. But ima machvis atachta mechusa eina eiser. So here was put a closed pot underneath. Once something is closed, so then it changes the whole din. This is a very common question people ask about putting things in the oven at the same time. So we don't put milchiks and fleishiks in the same oven, but you have fish and meat. People often ask, are you allowed to do that at the same time in the oven? Because we're makbid to keep them separate. So the whole discussion, reicha milsa, you learn in Tarubis that what's coming out is really reyach. If you put one on top of another, it's more than reyach. It might be zeya itself. But if it's only reicha, we say reicha. But we're worried about it. But the evid lav milsa. So, but if you cover it, so then you don't really have that coming out. You don't really need to worry about it. And so too over here, that if it's covered over, eina eiser. Now the Ramah explains himself why it's not eiser and opens up a complete new area of halacha, which is very, very important, very, very applicable, which we will discuss soon. Let's first go al hased. So if it was covered, it's okay. But lechatchila, you shouldn't do it. So lechatchila, you shouldn't do it. The question is why lechatchila you shouldn't do it. So in this context, when we're talking about covering the kedera, the milcha kedera you're putting under the fleishke, so the whole discussion in the Mefarshim why, but the reason is you cover it, and then it becomes uncovered. I mean, who says it's going to stay covered the whole time? And we're talking about zeya escaping. It doesn't need very much space for the zeya to escape. So if it's not there, so it's very common. Things spill over and things become. I mean, you have pots and things are not supposed to spill, but you look at any surface where they cook food and it ends up with schmutz on it because things are spilled. Then we say lechatchila is aser, but b'di'evet, if it happened, it's mutter. This distinction between lechatchila and b'di'evet is going to be very crucial when we get to the din of shtei kedeiros, because this is what the Ramah compares shtei kedeiros. We'll discuss in a few minutes the din of shtei kedeiros, which is very applicable. Then the picture of the meat pot is uncovered, yeah, but we're not worried about the question was asked in the picture. The meat pot is uncovered. This was a private message, I guess, on the chat. Yeah, the meat pot is uncovered. We're worried about that zayah is going up to the top. So therefore, the zayah that's coming out of the meat is going to make the roof of the ceiling of the oven. It's going to make it fleshik. But here we're worried about the milk, the zayah from the milk escaping. So if the milk is covered, it's not going to compromise the fleshing. Now you're worried about the zayah is going to go up to the top and then it's going to travel down over there and answer the thing on the bottom. So that we're not concerned about. But in terms of kashering ovens, we're not going to talk about that today. We might get to it a little bit, but that is not the consideration that we are looking at over here. Okay, the Tanai Shlishi is that has to be Yatzaledispe at the point of contact. So the way he puts it over here is that the Sir Ha'elyon is Resachas, that the top one is hot. So Imazeh Hanagas Hanagas Kvar Le Resachas, that if as we said before, when the steam coming out is no longer Yatzaledispe, but Sir Ha'elyon Resayach, but let's say the top one is hot. So the zay, it's like in that example we had before, the meat hanging over the pot of milk. So we said if it's high enough up, so the zay is not going to be yatzaledus anymore. Let's say the meat was yatzaledus. So over here, let's say that the zay cooled off, but the pot on top is rasech. Yesh machlekes aposkim. Are we worried about that also? Yesh lachmer l'maisa. We're machmer in such a case because we're concerned that when the moisture hits, then it's going to cause a problem. Now this is just some common cases. Let's say you have a food that's cooking. Say you have some meat that's cooking, and you need some more water there. So what does the person do? So they'll pour some water inside. Okay, they're going to put cold water inside. It's going to cool everything off. So they take a chaynik and they heat up some water. Okay, so now I have a keli, which was heated up and it's full of hot water. That keli is a klirish. Then you're going to take that, and what are you going to do? You're going to pour it inside the flesh kapat. Okay, so now what happens? Now what happens? Let's say it would be a milcha kapat, and you're pouring water into it. So since the top pot is hot, it's a klirishin. So klirishin, it was the electric coil, whatever it is a source of heat. So that water was cooked up in a klirishin, and you have hot water, which is water from a klirishin. You pour from that into the keli. So do we have a problem in that? So that we have machlekas aposkim. Another common case where this comes about, which becomes even more complicated, a person wants to add water to the cholent. Cholent is burning. The Shabbos person wants to add water to the cholent. So there are many different halachic considerations. You have to worry about bishul b'Shabbos, and then what happens? You're going to take from the urn and you're going to put it into a kli sheni, then put it inside. So then you're putting from a kli sheni into klirishin. Complicated. We're not going to the dinim of bishul b'Shabbos right now, but there are those that make a problem out of it. But if you want to get it straight from the klirishin in order to avoid the problem of bishul, then you create a problem of bosor b'chalav. Actually, you don't really create a problem of bosor b'chalav. You could just consider your urn to be fleshik. The problem is you're going to want to take the water from that urn and make yourself a cup of coffee and put some milk inside the coffee. That's the problem. So if you have steam, which is coming in contact with the keli that you're pouring from, the kliya elyon, the case in the picture, the case of the mechaber is fleshik on top and milk on the bottom. But a similar principle would apply if you have a fleshik on the bottom and parb on the top, like you're pouring from the parb of pot. So if you want to do it from a klirishin, which there are reasons to want to do that, because the dinim of bishul b'Shabbos, so then you're going to have to make sure that it's far enough away that it's the zayah is not going to go up into the chaynik. There's not going to be yatzaledis. So it could be a little bit complicated. You're not going to be able to pick up the urn. You got to move the cholent pot under the chaynik. It's a procedure. Okay, some more applications of this. I think you're getting there's the chaynik just flew into the picture, and you're pouring it into the fleshik soup, and it could be a problem. As you see, that we have many practical applications of this din. Let's go further. So here, we talked about what's the din of the top machmas. So you had fleshik on top, and you put milchik on the bottom. So when it came up, so it answered the top one. Good. What's with the bottom one? Are we worried about the bottom one too? So the Prima Godim says it's not a problem in the bottom one, unless the zeya, the steam that comes out of the bottom one, condenses. Excuse me, condenses when it hits the top one, forms liquid, and the tipus, the liquid, drops back into the bottom. So it's not a problem. Elim chazru ela tipus hazeh, that it came into tipus. Okay, that's what the Prima Godim says. So they bring over here a psak din. I'll read it like they printed over here, and it's also printed in the Chaveres like this. It's the wrong Maramakam, I believe, in the Chaveres, but anyway, they bring them from Alter Rebbe, Nochas Pesach Nesra, that the bottom one is asur. Ki ha'edim mahavim shibur beina l'sir ha'elim, because the steam creates a connection between the bottom pot and the top pot. So since they're both connected, so therefore, just like the upper one became Bosor because Bosor b'cholov, so it's connected with the bottom one. So it's also Mishum Bosor b'cholov. That's what they bring from the Alter Rebbe Milchos Pesach. Okay, and that's what it says in the Chaveres, clearly the Alter Rebbe answers. There's reason to differentiate between the cases. I'm not saying halacha l'maisa, especially I don't want anybody to fail the test. But the Alter Rebbe is first of all talking about chametz. And although we have many dinim of Bosor b'chalav, and Alter Rebbe refers to them like he does over here, and quotes the dinim of Bosor b'chalav, which indicates that it's not something unique about chametz. But there's something else different. That case is talking about a covered pot, and over here it's even though it might be within an oven, but as we said at the beginning of today's shiur, that when you have near of a kisa, once you cover a pot, so it's mamish like it's totally mixed up. Over here, it's not necessarily that degree of mixture. So, but pashtus, it's like it says over here, that the Alter Rebbe would answer the bottom pot, but there is reason to differentiate, and obviously a shiloh should be asked if this ever happens. Now, before we get to this picture here, so let's just talk about bachlal ovens. Why do you need a kosher oven bachlal? We need a kosher keli to cook in because there's going to be a blia. There's going to be let's say you have a treifa pot. You have somebody cook chazer in a pot. Or we're learning Bosor b'chalav. We have a milchik pot. We're going to have that zatigim. You have a pot that absorbs time. Then you put the food inside and you cook it, so the taste is going to go from the keli into the food. Okay, you understand that. What happens when you put something in the oven and you bake it? Where exactly is the tam coming from? So first of all, let's say I have a fleshko. How does something become fleshko? Make it a little easy. Make a milchik oven. How you bake pizza in the oven? How did the oven become milchik exactly? We took cheese and we stuck it to the wall, so there should be a blia. So the primary way this happens is through zeya. The zeya comes out of the food and gets absorbed into the ceiling of the oven. Plus, if you have a liquidy food, then the whole thing could be full of zeya. So you have zeya being absorbed into the walls on the side too. Now, there are times that there'll be a direct blia. So in the baking pan itself, obviously, the food is going to go into the baking pan, but there's contact there. There are many poskim, they say about kashering an oven that you have to treat the sides of the oven as if the food touched it directly. And it's not just zeya that there was a direct blia. Why? Because sometimes the oven is crowded and you put it to the side and the food touches the side, touches the wall. In any case, it's a huge difference because clearly when you have a direct blia and it's al yedei ha'esh, it's roasted, it's baked, whatever the case is. So whatever keli absorbed like that needs libun gamer. You have to turn it red hot. Whereas if it's zeya, so then you wouldn't need a libun gamer, and libun kal would be sufficient. You wouldn't need it. So the shaila is, why do you need to do libun gamer on the oven? So it's all based on the shaila. What is the status of this zeya? And there are other issues in kashering ovens that are complicated, our ovens at least. It's one of the things that was easier in the old days, the kasher oven. The whole thing was full of eish mamish. You had the fuel right over there in the oven, and you by kashering a matzah oven, you just spread out the coals, spread out the wood, and it's kasher. Whereas our ovens, you can't do that for a number of reasons. But the whole controversy is it required me'ikar adin to use the torch, and how far do you have to go with the torch? You need a mamish limon gomer in every last piece. There's only the places where there's a chash that are touched. Okay, we're not learning Agalas Kalim right now, but that's based. You see, it's all sort of a variation on a theme of this din. So the people ask, based on that, who says, well, you need to have a separate milchik and a fleshik oven? When it comes to isurim, we have the more stringencies. But when it comes to heter, there's a cloud. It's going to become relevant later on, so I might as well say it now. And we have discussed it in the past, parenthetically. But we learned about chatich nas and nevela, that you have chanan. Everybody holds by Bosor b'chalov that it's chatich nas and nevela. Machlek is about shari surim, Ephraim, Bentam. But if it comes Bosor b'chalov, it's for sure chatich nas and nevela. Okay. What about milk that came into water, or milk that came into potatoes? Is the potatoes nasa chalav? No, we say chatich nasa nevela. But just because the time of chalav or chalav mamish was absorbed into another food, if you have 2 ounces of milk and you have 8 ounces of something else and they're cooked together, we don't have 10 ounces of milchik. You only have 2 ounces of milchik. So the whole meichel is now milchik. Okay, but it doesn't mean it becomes mamish bosor. So therefore, when you're going to have a bliya in the oven, it doesn't make the oven treif, it makes the oven milchik. Okay, so what's going to happen later on when you're going to, let's say a person would put bosor in the milchik oven? What happened? So if it didn't touch the wall of the oven, do you have to worry about anything? The only shayla is going to be if that food gave off zayah. So if you have a dry fleshika food that doesn't give off any zayah, is there going to be a problem with the evet? Not necessarily. So those that want to say, you have some of the modern contemporary poskim and Sfardim especially, they want to say that certain cases you could be mekel, you wait 24 hours in between, you clean it, and so on and so forth. But certainly l'chatchila, you're not allowed to rely on this, because we have to worry about the zayah, and we worry that if the elyon had a certain status, that status is going to be conveyed to the tachton, as well as we discussed before the machlekes of poskim. We have a number of common cases over here, so that's baking things in the same oven. So another very wide-ranging application of this is the Nahariya kasher, a milchik oven. Let's say you have a fleshik oven and you want to bake a cake. You want to bake a cake, or you want to bake challah. Let's take a cake, and you want the cake to be parv. Why do you want the cake to be parv? It bothers you that it's fleshik. You're not gonna have to wait 6 hours, but you want to have it together with coffee. You want to have the cake together with coffee. You want it to be mamash parv. Then with fleshik oven, there can be a problem. So what do you do? Okay, so we'll learn something gimel, something dalit about benyame, and so on. But one of the issues is that when you have an iser, in general, you need libun gomer to get the taste out. Where if you have a heter, you have chazi, you need libun gomer to get out. If it was nivlal yedei eish, if it was nivlal yedei liquids, then we do hagala, get out with boiling water. If it was nivlal, it's a posik. We'll have it soon in chumash next week. That anything was used in fire, you bring in fire to kasher. If it was used with water, you kasher with water. Okay, but that's if it's a iser. In Midian, they weren't having kosher meat. Okay, so it was bailei and iser. But if it was a heter, then you don't need libun gomer. Even if it was nivla eish, you don't need it. So this all affects the status of oven. We'll get to it in Mitzvah. Now, you have these, they call it here, kalet edim, the hood or the vent over the oven So again, as I mentioned, in industrial kitchens, it's very often they're more worried about the fire and different sorts of damage. But you have even in a regular home, you have this object which is hovering over the stovetop. So if a person is using different elements, some for milchik, some for fleshing, and then the zaya comes off the top. So let's say first you make yourself in the morning, you make yourself some hot chocolate, and there's some zaya coming out. And what happens to that object which is hovering over that hood? So you have to see, is it far enough away that's not yatzaledis? So if it's a little tiny pot like that, maybe it's not yatzaledis. When it comes Pesach and you bring out the pots which are fit for big Idalia Gumber, people, or anytime people are cooking big pots. So then it's first of all higher, it's closer to the hood, and it's larger amounts, and it's making more steam. So maybe it's going to be yatzaled this way. Some foods you cook when they're covered, some foods you cook when they're not covered. So it's pashut the ma'aseh, you have to check. You don't know, because if you cooked something fleshik over there, and it was yatzaledis when it hit that hood, so then it's belay at the time of Bosor. And later on, you're going to do the same thing with milchik, so you have a problem. Especially if it's within 24 hours. It's not within 24 hours. Okay, we'll learn later on the Gimel, Tzad Dalet, that in a Benyame we have certain kulas. Okay, when it comes Pesach, we're lechatchila also we're machmar on a Benyame on Pesach. Okay, and Pesach is a mashahu. So usually, what you have to do with these things is you have to cover them. You have to foil them over. You have an industrial kitchen; they won't let you do that.
Is the issue that something will fall down from the hood? Is that the issue?
The issue is the same issue that we learned in Sifches. According to the Prima Godom, you're worried only for this tipus. But according to Alter Rebbe, at least the way we're quoting it over here, that there's a chibur between the Elyon and the Tachta. So since the Elyon absorbed first Tam Bosor and then Tam Cholav, so when it absorbed Tam Bosor, it's mamish the case of the Mechaber. This is the Mechaber's case. The Mechaber says you have a Kedei Shel Bosor on top. So okay, so it's not the kedei itself has tam basar in it, right? The metal or the clay, whatever kind of keli it is, the keli itself has tam basar. Inside that keli, there you have basar mamish. It's kedei shel basar. The kedei itself is already a problem. Over here, if it was close enough as yatzalet, this place the thing absorbed tam basar. It's like a kedei shel basar. There's no basar inside, but it has tam basar. Especially if it's within 24 hours. And then you're going to cook some milk underneath. That's the machvis shel chalav that has the zayah that's going up into the kedei shel basar. It's mamish the same case.
Are we worried here?
1 second. Then you're answering the hood. Nobody eats the hood anyway. Who cares about answering the hood? So that's the shayah that's on the screen now. Question now becomes, what's with your pot of milk that you cooked over there? According to Alter Rebbe here, at least, that it's making a chibur, but Pasha says and it's going to answer the bottom one too. So then you have to have a problem. So you have to be careful when you have these hoods, and if you're using both Bosor and Chalav on the same stovetop, so it's an issue, and it's even a bigger issue when it comes to Pesach. Okay, there's some questions here in the chat. All the Chassidim do this. Do what?
I think he was talking about the double oven.
No, they changed the ovens from milchik to fleshiks.
Okay, we're mixing a few things together. Okay.
No, that was we were talking about
hood vent. Okay, let me back up. I'm not responsible for the pictures over here. Okay.
Are we worried here?
Having two separate ovens with a milchik, a fleshik, one on top of the other. That's the picture on the bottom right. Okay. I didn't really address this at all. Okay, what he's addressing in the Cheveres is primarily people that want to use the same oven mamish for milchik and fleshik, not just have separate ovens that are just part of one unit. Now there are a number of potential halachic issues with something like this. The zayah being one of them, and the zayah could be in a number of ways. The zayah could be when you open up the door of one, that it goes into the other, which you could take care of to a certain extent by not opening them up at the same time. But some of them, the seals are not so absolute, that the steam will get inside anyway, even if you didn't open the door. Also, if they share a common wall, that the roof of the bottom oven and the floor of the top oven are the same, so then it's being Beleya, Bosor from one, Challah from the other. That's certainly a problem.
The same meaning there's no
Third potential problem. There's the same potential problems. Each one of these units is somewhat different. How you vent these ovens is also an issue. Are they venting out the same way? And if you have steam mixing in the vent, does that make a chibur too? How far you go with this chibur issue is a very, very important mesubach shaila, extremely relevant in modern day kashrus, because today most of the cooking that's being done, I didn't take a poll, but certainly a large amount of the cooking is being done with steam jackets. So you have a double jacket. I think I mentioned one of the other shiurim. Take a visual aid here. So if you have a pot, and then you have another pot going around that pot, and you have a space in between, and then you have steam circulating around. It's closed, and you have steam coming in through a pipe.
This is in factories.
Wall. So this is called a steam jacket, a double jacket. So you have steam.
It's in factories like that.
Yeah. This is the most common way of cooking food today because it's cheap and it's fast, and that's what they do in factories. And you have it in a factory. You go to a medium-sized bakery in your neighborhood. Very likely has a small one of these things in the back.
Lots of commercial kitchens.
Mada has one, yeah.
Yeah, we have one.
Yeah,
One-
commercial kitchens.
One question.
Cheapest way to cook. Let me just finish this one point. We'll take some questions. So what happens in this steam? The steam is circulating from one kettle to another kettle. So if you're in a factory and one of them is cooking milchiks and one of them cooking fleishiks, so then, or one of them is treif, or they kashered, they kashered. They're making one kosher product and making other non-kosher products. Even if they want to make all kosher products, so this is one of the major nightmares in kashrus, because since we're talking about bliyas on the other side of the wall, like we learned by the din of tipus chalav, put that together with this din we learned over here, the machvas. So what happened if they cooked something today, if they cook chazer in a kettle and there's steam on the outside? So the pashtus, there's taste going back and forth from one side of the wall, just like the tipus chalav on the outside went in, that certainly the time from the inside goes out. So if you have steam that's on one side of the wall and you have chazer on the other side of the wall, okay, so you have the time of the steam is like tipus challah falling in from the pot from the outside. But if you look from this side, this is the outside. So you have the time of the chazer, which is going into the steam. Then you take that steam, everybody finishes work, all the steam condenses, you have water. Then they leave it for ben yemei. Along comes the kasher sage and says, time to kasher the water. So what do? Time to kasher the pot. You fill it up with water and you boil it up. What are you boiling it up with? You're boiling it up with treif steam. Anyway, it's a major issue. How do you get the steam out? How do you drain it? It's a major headache in the field of kashrus. And Neisin Tam Lefgam, it fits more in Hilchos Taruvus. It's better to eat home.
Question. The Alter Rebbe regarding the chibur, the way I understood it when you first said it was in an oven. How does that? To what extent do you go if you're taking it to a hood? How maybe on the other side of the house, steam.
Yeah, and if it's the other side of the house, like we had before, we had the din of the kedera last week. We had the Ramah over there. The kedera spilled. If it's still yatzaledes.
Are we having an issue
Alter
here?
Rebbe is not talking about oven. Alter Rebbe is talking about a kedera with the kisu kedera. But okay, good. Yes, no, good question. Good. That's a shayla. I must say, no.
Is the issue here just an issue of blia, or is there an problem of Isser Bishul?
What do you mean Isser Bishul? Bishul.
Yeah, let's say you have two pots sitting together on two pots near each other. Even though nothing is gonna, the pots are not gonna touch each other, but the steam is gonna connect. Or like you said, the ovens, two ovens.
If you look in the Lubavitch Women's Cookbook, the purple cookbook, famous purple cookbook, the Rabbi Marlow was responsible for the for looking over the halachas. And he had 2 younger light helping him out with the halachas. I was one of them. And so there were certain things there's a very interesting things. Some things he took in, some things he took out, some things he allowed to be rewritten, some things he didn't allow to be rewritten. Very interesting. But one of the things he mentioned over there is that when you have 2 pots, so if you have separate burners, you could have a milchik pot and a fleishik pot for cooking on the burner. And as long as they're covered, there's no problem. But the thing about pots that are covered is that eventually they're going to become uncovered, like you say in Tumotah, safe Tumolotzes, sometime or other the door is going to open. So you didn't put the cover on the pot to stay on there forever. Sometime the cover is going to come off. So then you have to check out the food in the middle of cooking. What are you going to do? You're going to pick up the cover. So let's say you pick up the cover of the milk, you pick up the cover of the flesh. You pick up the cover of the milchik steam comes out. You pick up the cover of the flesh steam comes out. So what does he say to do over there? That when you pick up the cover, so instead of opening up the cover like this, and opening the cover of this one like this, and then if the covers are like this, the steam will mix together and answer each other, and perhaps answer each pot, because the steam makes a chibur from one to the other. So instead, open up the cover the other way, open the cover like this, so the steam goes out this way, and this one, the steam goes out this way. The Beferish Lubavitch Women's Cookbook. Yeah.
But we are working for an Isra Bishul here, right?
We're talking over here mainly, it's hard to call that Derech Bishul. Derech Bishul also the table. I mean, it's not Derech Bishul to cook with steam, which is coming out of the covers on top. Now, the shaila is today, if there's Derech Bishul also Teira, because today everybody's cooking with steam jackets. Okay, but that's perhaps the steam jacket became that became Derech Bishul, but it's not the Derech Bishul that we want to cook.
If a microwave said,
I can't. Yeah, that's what Mesha says about the microwave.
Yeah, you said that.
That since today it became Derech Bishul, that's also Derech Bishul. But there you're cooking the food in the microwave. Here you're talking about a blia into steam.
But the steam was cooked.
I hear the argument, but you certainly have an issue when it comes to a chiluk. The fact they have chemicals in the water change. Okay, so that's the whole.
The question.
The Kashrus organization said in the chat, yes, if you put chemicals in water, doesn't change it. So that's what they do with these steam jackets. Officially, you drain the boiler, and then you put in fresh water, and you put in a davar pagam, and you put
The question I had.
some other material, and then it becomes. The water becomes bad tasting, and then any taste that comes into it, it's nice and tamil comes, so it doesn't have the power to answer anything. Anyway, we're not learning commercial kashrus. It's a very fascinating discussion, but I think we should go further. We have a lot more to cover. There's a lot of very important dinim over here, and I would love to sit on longer, but we do have a schedule that we're trying to keep to. So if there's anything directly on topic, please ask, and if not, let's go further.
The Alter Rebbe is talking about when the top pot is hot also, right?
Yeah.
If it's cold, it's not an issue.
So then it depends if the steam is hot enough.
A regular home oven to change is very common. People, I know people that change.
Okay. The idea of changing back and forth from milchiks to fleishiks is a Magen Avram that says you shouldn't do it by from kavua because people are going to get mixed up. But if a person only has one oven, so then we see even from the Alter Rebbe in Ilchos Shavuos, when he talks about the baking something milchik for Shavuos. So the Alter Rebbe says over there, you have to kash the oven first, and if it's made out of cheres, then you have to do libun gomer, and if not, you can do a libun kal, and therefore you don't even have to say a person forgot to kasher it on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to kasher things. It's tikkun keli. But since you only need a libun kal, so just preheat the oven. It's already a libun kal gendik, so it's not nicker that you're kashering it. That's all that if it says about tevilas kelim, then you can take the keli if you have a mikveh if you have a well with it's a kosher mikveh in your chutzner, so then you can go and take water from the well. And the keli gets tabled, so you don't have a problem tabling keli on Shabbos, sticking keli because you're making the keli usable because it's not recognized. So too, he says you heat up the oven. Okay, so you kasher it already. So the reason the oven is an exception because you can't expect people to have a fork. So get yourself a milchik fork and a fleishik fork. Don't keep kashering back and forth. You're going to get mixed up. But when it comes to oven, people are not expected to have multiple ovens. Although today we have As a rachvos, you can have 3 ovens. You got barb oven too. You got basic oven, milk basic oven. You got whatever you want. There's a lot of ovens. So it's but yeah. So that's a limitation from the Magen Avram. That's held by most of the poskim. You shouldn't both in Kavua keep cashing back things from one to another. But yeah, people do it because if you don't have, so Torah is not going to ask you from making food from the other bit. Okay, so now let's go further. Zeya ha'ela metafshel besori imretev nechshav hazeya kabosor. So the shaila is, since there's retev, there's liquid. So then the liquid that's coming out is considered zeya. But let's say it's not a liquid. Let's say there's no liquid. Let's say it's dry. So let's say it's zeyas eichlin. It says on the top over there in the brown zeyas eichlin. Zeyas eichlin is to differentiate it from the case of the machaber, which was a machvis shel cholav. Cholav is liquid. So with the stuff that's coming out of it, it's mamish zeya. It's liquid. Liquid it makes a lot of zeya. But let's take the other extreme. Let's say you're baking a matzah. You're baking cookies. There's zeya coming out of the cookies. So anytime you bake something, there is some liquid coming out. I mean, that's what baking is all about. You make a dough, and it's a mixture of flour. It's a matzah, it's just flour and water. It's a cookie. It's got other things there too, but it's soft. Why is it soft? Because it has water in it, has liquid in it. When you bake it, what happens? You cook out the liquid, and then it becomes hard. So obviously there's something coming out. But the shaila is, how much is it? If you have a dry dough, then it's very, very little, which is coming out. It's not nicker b'chlal. You can't notice it coming out. You go to a river, and there's water evaporating there. You don't see water evaporating from the river. Not nicker b'chlal. So this is something that's going to answer something else. So we really have 3 categories of things. We have liquids, which is the case of machaber. And then we have eichlin, which are foods which contain a significant liquid content. And then we have things that have hardly any liquid content, like a cookie or a matzah, a dough of matzah. So what's with the middle case? What's with the case? Are we worried about zeyas eichlin? It has a picture of a pizza. So it looks like it's supposed to be Bosor over there on the upper shelves, and the person forgot that there was fleishiks over there. It's a fleishik oven, and decided to bake a pizza. Nafshei choshka bepizza. So he went and he put a pizza in the oven. What's a pizza? Pizza's eichlin. Pizza's dry. Pizza's not so dry. It's got chveis, the sauce, has the sauce over there. So recently, those learning smichas chavers brought over there from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, they want to hold that ketchup is a dover yovish, because it's made from tomatoes. Anyway, call it a dover yovish. But a Meisher writes in Ikras Meisher, what kind of dover yovish? He thinks it's all full of liquids, it pours. Anyway, so on the one hand, it's not liquid, that's for sure not. It's not like this pizza is not like a pot of milk. On the other hand, it's got liquid too. So do we worry about the zeya coming out of it or not? So nechlok poskim. Machlek is a poskim whether we worry about it or not. So Prima Godam says zeyas eichel kedin eichel atzmi. That it doesn't have the status of it's only by the case of a liquid. That's what the Mahaber is talking about. The Shuv Zarosh talking about a liquid who says it applies to eichel. Says Prima Godam. No, Piske Shuv brings from other achrenim zeyas eichel. That should be eichel atzmi. It's machlek is a poskim. Yeah. So Tzemach Tzedek in a Tshuva Or Chaim discusses this. So he brings down, it's not 100% clear, but the la'alacha neita tzemach tzedek shegam zeyas ha'eichel nechshavas kedin ha'eichel. So we are worried about this. So this is a very, very common shaila that happens in people's homes. They get mixed up, the milk with fleishik, somebody put in something by mistake. And one of the possible pesach lahatir that you look and say, what it was that was being cooked? It was something which had zeya, is a significant amount of, it very often happens with baking, and people want to know, can they eat it with milchik or something like this? So one of the things you look for, this is not Tshuva Rav Meisha who differentiates You can have it over here, yeah. But Dvarim Yeveshim Lagamri, but there Chayin Lachshush Oyelam Zeh. I believe it's a Chubur Ramesh, where he brings out this differentiation that if it's something which is mamish dry, so then you don't have to worry as much. Again, it's always a shayla vad masay, so it's could I ask a shayla and look into it? And this is an issue we really need in order to finish this discussion. We need some in the rest of Tzadik Dal and Tzadik Hey about Nat Barnat to know about what's happening here. It's the taste of the meat went into the oven, and then it went from the oven into the cake. Exactly how many steps took place over there. If you're making something parv over here, we're talking about a milchika pizza. You want to talk about, a parva cake or something like that. Then it's a different story. It's already in the realm of Nat Barnat, so we have to wait for that. I just want to finish this sif before we take a break here. And it's a very, very big subject, and I'm not going to be able to give the time it deserves and needs. But again, the main place where it's over here is also Neflas Taruvus. But then I must say this third condition, that one of the three conditions, that it had to be Megula, and if the Gedera Shel Cholav was covered, you don't have to worry about it. So that Ramah sneaks in a line over here. So the last two lines over here in the Ramah, V'kein ima machvis mechusa, hakol shor. If the pot of milk on the bottom was covered, everything's okay. Mida, because it's just like another case that's mutter. Oh, this other case is a handful. Mida dahave, it's just like the case of shtei kederes, negazubazu. When you have two pots touch each other, then eisrin zuazu benegia. If they touch each other, since it's just a pot touching each other, there's not food touching each other, so then it's okay. So kolsh came bezeya, certainly bezeya. And then the Rama puts in mi l'chatchila yesh lo zar b'chol zeh, but l'chatchila you should be careful about everything. So, what exactly is the Rama talking about? The Rama said that there's three conditions you need in order for the zayah to answer. It has to be atzletis, has to be covered, has to be the food itself. Otherwise, not a problem. So is this mi l'chatchila talking about that? Mi l'chatchila yesh lo b'chol zeh, everything from the beginning of the sif. Maybe it's not talking about shtei kederes. Shtei kederes is not really discussed over here at great length. Is it a din also in shtei kederes? Is it a din in everything? Is this whole thing talking about b'diavad, or is it also talking about l'chatchila? So this din of shtei kederes is very, very wide application. So we need to talk about shtei kederes. Here's on the bottom we have shtei kederes nagazu b'zu. So we have a flesh kapat, we have a milcha kapat. Both this one is full of cholov mamish. This one is full of basar mamish. Both of them are klirishin, both of them are hot, and they touch each other. Okay, the food does not touch the food. The outside of the pot of milchiks touch the outside of the flesh pot. Is their problem? That's called shtei kederes. We see it's shtei kederes, right? But shtei kederes negazu b'zu. What's the din? We say taste will not go mikeli lakeli bli reitiv. If there's no moisture in between, the taste will not travel, even though that's a flesh kapat midir raisa, and that's a milch kapat midir raisa, which is tam keikir. So food goes into a keli goes into the food. Okay, but tam keli does not go into tam keli unless there's something to convey it, to get it from one place to another. So if the point of contact between these two kederes is clean and dry, that's the din of shtei kederes. So it's mamish pella otzim. You have over here mamish a hot pot of milk, a hot pot of meat. They touch each other where they're still hot, and everything's kosher. But then shtei kederes, as long as it was dry and clean at the point of contact, that is the din of shtei kederes. There's no reitiv, the taint can't go to the other. So the Rama says, if this is okay, shtei kederes. So if it's not food inside the pot, it was only zayans that's coming to the outside of the pot, so then for sure it's okay. Okay, so therefore, if it's covered, you don't have to worry about anything. That's what the Rama said. Now, one of the very big discussions in halacha that we're not going to solve today is this only a din of b'diavad, or is this even okay l'chatchila? And this is where the whole concept of double wrapping food comes from. Let's just let's much to cover here. Okay, well, I'll take at least that case. It's very, very applicable and important to understand what's going on. Airline meals. An airline meal is being heated up in a treifa oven. A treifa dirty oven. So the shaila is how you allowed to do that. So it's covered. But what happens? So if you have in the Ramaz din, if it was covered, then we're not worried about the zayah from the other one. Yeah, but this is a filthy oven. Probably stuff spilled on the bottom, and the zayah coming from underneath your tray of your entree. You got chveis, they're cooking, monkey food for monkeys in Malaysia Airline for first class. Who knows what they're cooking over there? And some of it's spilled on the bottom, and the zayah, who knows what that's coming around the whole thing. Who says it's okay? So what all the airline meals do is you double wrap. You put a double layer around the entire thing. What does that do? That creates a situation of shtei kedetas. Okay. Here, shtei kedetas, the way we look at shtei kedetas, they're side by side. Okay, but you can have the same din of shtei kedetas. All you need, let's say one of these kedetas was treif and the other one was kosher. We have a problem. Shtei kedetas. The taste of the treif is not going to go into the kosher. Okay. So let's say, for argument's sake, over here in the picture, so the red one is kosher and the blue one is treif. Let's say for argument's sake. Okay, so they touch each other, there's no problem. So let's say the treifa blue stuff spills on the other pot. So now we have a problem. Okay, how can you solve that problem? The way you solve that problem is you put another kedera around the kosher kedera. And then what's going to happen? The treifa stuff spills on the outer kedera. It'll make a treif. Good. It's like we made a third kedera here. Okay. So then the treif spilled on the outer one and made a treif. But then the treif is touching the kosher. And the point of contact is dry and clean. The food on the inside is still kosher. That's what they do with your airline meals. So the food, the wrapping that's wrapping up the food, that's wrapping up the entree, that's the first kedera. Then on top of that, you put a second layer, so that's the second kedera. So it doesn't matter that Malaysian airline is cooking monkeys and it's dripping onto your entree. Doesn't make any difference. Why? Because that outer layer is going to become treif. But who cares? It's shtei kedetas. As long as the point of contact between the outer layer and the inner layer is okay, so then everything remains kosher. That's why it says you can't break the seal, because if you break the seal, then you can get moisture inside, and ein tam, the taste will not go because the data, but if there's some sort of moisture inside, so the taste will go to one to the other. So therefore, if you break that seal, it's farfal. So that's why when they wrap these things, you have to be completely wrapped around once and completely wrapped around a second time. And there's a b'chlal and eitzah. If you don't have a kosher oven, and a person wants to heat something up, you can double wrap it and you have the dinner shtei kedetas. But in all these things, you come back to the question, is this also good l'chatchila? So one of the answers is that there are days that says l'chatchila. Another answer to this question is when you're on an airline, if you had a kosher oven, then it would be l'chatchila, you should go in the kosher oven. But you don't have a kosher oven, you're up in the air, and it's a b'di'avadik situation. So who has to get on the plane, right? But nevertheless, that is the being relied on, especially since there are many poskim that say that there's also good lechatchila. We need to take a break. I know it's very long, so let me just very negate the kedim, but we can't do every. We're going to have to do this. I guess I'll just say it, and we'll talk about it a little bit more after the break. You see in the middle over here. So this is again one of the most common shaylas that come up in any kitchen. The person has a milchik burner, the person has a fleischke burner. They took the milchik pot. This looks like mac and cheese, let's say. Okay, they took the mac and cheese and they put on a fleischke burner, shayla. Okay, so what happened over here exactly? Okay, so first of all, what makes that fleischke burner fleischke? So probably some soup spilled on it or something that absorbed something. So first of all, there's a shayla whether the eish burned it away, like we learned previously, L'gabatipus cholib, it's mamish keneged eish. Okay, you can make an argument, say it's not mamish keneged eish. The eish is on the bottom, and the bli is going to be from the top. Okay, so let's say it's not burned away. Okay, so it's fleshik. It's fleshik. Okay, we're soon going to learn about Eina Ben Yem is that it's a habit. Things don't spill over every single day or every single meal. It happened in the last 24 hours, number one. Number two, even if it did happen in the last 24 hours. So then you put the milcha kapar on top. What is this? It's shteikederis. It's just we're accustomed to thinking of this as it is in the picture of the right, that the shteikederis are one next to another. And over here, the shteikederis, one is on top of the other. The tripod, whatever you call that, misgaris, what the pot is sitting on by this gas stovetop, is a keli. So it's not a kedera, but it has the same dinner, shtei kederas. So if they're touching each other, so then there's no problem. The shaila is whether you're allowed to do this l'chatchila. So there are some of them, the more modern Orthodox, you want to call it, different. Meshu was not modern Orthodox. But he said, Bachal, who says you need Bachal? They have to have separate burners for milk inflation. So l'chatchila comes out according to Mishnah Berurah, according to l'chatchila, certainly you should have separate burners. But not everybody holds like that. So to say the whole house is treif because they did like that, why should it be like that? Yes, it is possible that the bottom of the pot was wet or something like that, but it's not very likely. And whether you have to worry about the l'chatchila or not is an issue. And here, when you have a plata, some sort of hot pot like this, and things spill over, so the shaila is when you spilled over. So say you had fleshik on it, spilled over. Had the fleshik on it, so then could you put something when there's no fleshik on it? Could you put milchik on it because there's shtei kederis? You're allowed to do such a thing. So all of these are questionable in Yonim. Okay, it's already quite late. We need a break. Everybody needs a break. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll deal with the questions in the chat afterwards. So it's now 24 at 8:34 minutes. Hashem shall resume. Okay, gentlemen, it's 8:34. We have a lot of ground to cover here. Some very important, more important inyanim over here. But let's first address the questions in the chat. Material of shtei data is only metal foil. It just has to be something that's not going to tear. It doesn't matter what the material is. There's all discussion. Alter Rebbe, they would use a sheet, a sadin. Anyway. Plastic is certainly good. Another message here, very often there's condensation between the two layers. If there is, then there's a problem. It's a milsa b'taima. So if it was double wrapped and the moisture got through anyway, that means there's a problem with the way they're wrapping it. There's a new, not so new, that's been around for a little while, that's a very ingenious way of doing things, that you have, the Pesach plastic tablecloths, it's very hard to separate them because they don't use starch. Like when you have plastic things together, so then if you don't put starch in, so the plastic sometimes is very hard to separate, so the kosher Pesach doesn't have starch. So it's hard to separate. So two pieces of plastic get stuck together very, very well. They're still different pieces of plastic, but it's hard to separate. So they make a double plastic wrapping for the entree when they make the airplane meals, and then they seal it. And fartik, that's it. It looks like a single one. It has the din of shtei kederis, so everything is everything halachically is basically fine. So anyway, that's a ingenious way. Yeah, just give me 1 second. Just want to take attendance here. Excuse me. Just want to take attendance by clipping the screen. Oh, did I get everybody? It doesn't look like it. Just give me 1 second, please. Sorry about that. Okay. So, so I guess that's it for the questions. I wanted to mention one last point about the shtei kederis issue, and that's something which is pointed out by the Shach. You have it in Piskei Dinim. Alter Rebbe brings it down. You have it here, and you have it also mentioned in Siman Tzadik Zayin. very interesting point, which how much we pass like this or not is a very interesting question. But just to point it out, it's a very big, very big chumrah. Okay. So when you look at the din of shtei kedetus, so the classic case of shtei kedetus right over here is that you have an outside of a pot touching the outside of a pot. Okay. Now, compared to the other two cases, let's take especially the case on the left. Let's say you had a fleshka pot and it spilled onto this hot plate. Okay, so you cleaned it up, so it's got an absorption taste over there. So it's like a fleshka kedera. Right? Then you put a milcha kapar on top. So we want to say shtei kedeus. Is that the same as the case on the right? It's not the same as the case on the right. Why is it not the same? Because in the case of the right, it's the outside of both pots. So there's no contact where there was a direct belia of the food. If you remember, as a whole discussion we had last week about tipus chalav that fell in the kedera foods, we're full of all different sort of speakers. So we're machmir because we're not sure exactly what happens, and all different sorts of chumrah, different sort of machlekes and theories about exactly what's happening over there and how far is the time going. Okay, but there's no argument when it's the inside of the pot. There's no suffix whatsoever. If you cook food inside a pot, and there's the direct bleed. So that hot plate over there absorbed and has a different status than a pot which is on the outside. The shtei kedetus, it's the outside of one kedera touching the outside of the other kedera. Over here, it's like the outside of one kedera touching the inside of the other kedera. Who says that's the same thing as shtei kedetus? Okay. So it's just that this whole heter is not so pushed. But we have more ground, so we shall proceed. Sif, it says over here, Sif Ches, this is actually Sif Tes, this is the last Sif of Simon Tzadik base. And the basic idea is, let's say you have a candle. Let's say it's made out of chaylev. And it drips onto a surface. Chaylev is treif. So what do you do with the surface? What kind of hechsher does it need? If you remember in the very, very first class, we were talking about different types of hechsher. We spoke about kedei klifa, which means you have to take off an entire layer at once. And then we have greda or greda, which is scraping off a layer, but it doesn't require, it's not as strict, it doesn't require that it has to come off all at once. Because if you have to get it all off at once, you have to cut a little bit thicker. And greda, we have to take off the whole layer, but it doesn't have to be all at once, so a little bit more made. So over here, we want to see if some hot wax, treifa wax, fell onto a surface. Here we have a wooden surface, and some treifa wax is going to fall on. So the question is, where did it fall from? Okay. In general, we're going to say this would have the din of melted wax, has a din of irui. Like where the fire is would be like a klidishin, but then it drips onto something else, and it's like a iri klidishin. The shaila is, do we need kadei klifa like a iri klidishin? So the Machaber says as follows. This is siftas. Ner shel chaylev, also ner shel shayva. Shayva is kosher wax. Chaylev is animal fat, is teif. Shenotav mimeno tipa al kli, and a drop melted and dripped onto the keli. Ein tzarach im greda. All you need is greda. If some of the wax melts, okay, here it's showing it's solid. It doesn't have to be solid, but if it doesn't come directly from the top, came from somewhere down further, and it melted onto it, then grade is sufficient. But if it just melted the chaylev right over here on the top, and that fell a drop, then you need hagala. So grade is sort of chashav shrifas atzalach b'makom nefilas hachaylev. You have to take off a layer, so you have to keep scraping until you get off a piece. But if it falls mamish from the top like this, so then it's not enough. Then you have to mamish take. So it says hagala over here. The hagala, it doesn't have to be hagala in a klidishin. It will be a hagala with iri klidishin. So that's kadei klippus. Either you take off a layer, and it tells so you take off one layer all in one, If it's a type of material that can be kasher, you could do a yiri klarish, you could boil up some water and put it on. Okay. Hadar alach Siman Tzadik base, and now we're starting Siman Tzadik. This Gemara is the central Gemara about kasher and kelim, and therefore it deals with the central issue of absorption of taste in a kelim. And the subject, which is the central character of this siman, is the issue of Neis and Tam Lefgam. But something as Aina Ben Yemei, just to review I'm sure you're all familiar, but just to review, make sure everybody's on the same page, that if taste was absorbed within the last 24 hours, it's called a Ben Yemei. So a Tinik Ben Yemei is the way to remember. Tinik Ben Yemei is a newborn child. So as long as it was newborn, it's not 24 hours old yet, it's called a Ben Yemei. After it's more than 24 hours, and the taste becomes somewhat spoiled. Exactly the nature of what happens to the taste is beyond the scope of our share, whole discussion. But in any case, it's called Neis and Tam Lefgam. The taste has become Tam Pogum, and the status changes as we see here in the Gemara, and as we will now be discussing in Shulchan Aruch. So here, this is the Braisa which speaks about what you have to do to kasher kelim. This is the end of the Gemara. Berel talks about tefillas kelim, talks about agalos kelim. If it's used with liquid, you do with hot boiling water, and if it was used on the fire, you have to kasher like a baking pan, where there was just heat, dry heat causing the absorption. So then, such a keli, you have to kasher with fire. Yeah. So let's say it was used. And you didn't kasher it. So Tanya Choda Aser, Tanya Yidach Mutter. It's before the highlighted part. So there's a machlekes. One Braisa says b'diavad it's Aser, the other one says b'diavad it's Mutter. So the Gemara says la kasher, la kasher. How the man da tam Neis and Tam Lefgam Aser, how command da Neis and Tam Lefgam Mutter. It's a machlekes where the Neis and Tam Lefgam is also Aser. And as you see, the little letter over here for the Mishpat, the we pass on Neis and Tam Lefgam is mutter. So if it was or Neis and Tam Lefgam, so b'diavad it's okay. Laman da'am Neis and Tam Lefgam mutter giuleyev the kacham das rachman eich mishkachas. So if it's Eina Ben Yemei and it's already mutter, so why do you have the din of Hagalos Kelim? You have the whole Parshas Minyan, you have the kasher Kelim, Hagalos Kelim. If it just wait 24 hours. We assume that the people are maybe that when they defeated the Midyanim, they defeated the Midianites, so they just mamish finished the war and they just had cooked up a soup. They made a Michael over there, and then you killed them and you defeated the Midianites. It's time to sit down and eat. No, you have to kasher it first. It's a Ben Yemei, and they're all hungry. They want to eat. In the middle of war, it's different. Anyway, but in any case, so Bavchal, why do we have a whole din of Hagalos Kelim if Neis and Tam Lefgam is mutter? So Amar Rav Chia Berei Derafuna lo yasra teire el kadeira bas yema. The love Neis and Tam Lefgam Zataka Midiaraisa. I mean, there's a whole discussion about this, but the Pashto Pshat over here is that you need to kasher kelim Midiaraisa. The reason Hagalos Kelim Midiaraisa is only the case when it's a kadeira bas yema. So the Gemara says if the only problem is when in the first 24 hours, so wait 24 hours, no kasher. So from then on, after it's no longer a Ben Yemei, after 24 hours, lishteri, be materit. What's the problem? So Gemara says, no, it's Gezeira midrabanan. Gezeira k'deira sheina bas yema, meshum k'deira bas yema. Chachamim did not allow you to use a k'deira which is not a Ben Yemei, because you might get mixed up between ein Ben Yemei and a Ben Yemei. So the way we do, we don't kasher a Ben Yemei normally. We kasher only ein Ben Yemei, so all things only midrabanan midiraisa would not be no problem. And that's why when things go wrong, then one of the first questions is, was it a Ben Yemei or ein a Ben Yemei? And this is now we're getting into the section on Kalim with full force over here. Okay, so Kedeira Bas Yema Iseres is a Tafshul Shabbatech. Tam Keke Midiraisa, and if it was a Ben Yemei, the Kedeira, the pot was a Ben Yemei, so then it's going to answer the food which is inside. Kedeira She'eina Bas Yema, but if it was more than 24 hours, then it's already the nice and Tam Lefgam. Eina Iseres is a Tafshul Shabbatech, but the Ever is not going to answer anything. But even if it's the Ein Ben Yemei, you're not allowed to use it. It's the Treifa Keli, Midrabanan, you are not allowed to use it. Okay, so let's walk this through now. You have a fleishige pot, and you can see the blue is for milk. I never really saw blue milk before, but anyway. So you put milk inside the fleishige pot. So when was this pot used last for fleishigs? So if it was within 24 hours of the meat, you cook the milk inside, that's bishul basa b'cholim midiraisa, and it's also bano, it's also bachila, it's also bano, it's 100% 100% tasa. Now,
You got frozen for a minute.
I got frozen, my voice, my picture, the
Picture. I mean, that's on my end. It was. You're
Uh-huh.
saying if it was
within 24 hours from the time that it absorbed tam basa, the time that you cook the chalav inside, so it's an issa d'iraisa and it's also bano. It's basa b'chalav d'iraisa. Tam kikat d'iraisa, it's basa b'chalav d'iraisa, and it's also bano. Now, l'nitin l'shar shetama basa b'tal b'shishim b'chalav. Maybe we can say the tam basar in the kedera is maybe you don't have to measure against the whole kedera. I mean, how much basar is in that kedera? We have to measure against the volume of the entire kedera. So the answer is yes. So Rashishim Keneged called Napa Chasir. The entire volume of this pot, we have to assume we have two chumras that in general are being used. One of them is the first of all, the absorption when you cook meat into that pot. Okay. And now you emptied out the meat and you're left with just the pot. So how much of that pot is actually flesh? It's a flesh pot. So if the pot is, let's say we're going by volume. So let's say we'll use metric. So it's 500 milliliters of volume. Okay. So you cooked inside the fleshik. So we consider this now 500 milliliters of basar. Who says? So the answer is that we normally assume, unless we have proof otherwise, which we'll soon discuss when we might have proof otherwise, that enough taste went in and the whole thing now is flesh. Now, just because the whole thing went in, does that mean the whole thing's going to come out? So we're machmer like that too. We can count it as the whole thing went out. So normally when you're meshayah, there's a klal which is given in halacha. B'derech klal ein b'chalav shabatei chakli pishishim minapa chakli atzma. In a keli, normally you never, except when you don't, but you never have shishim to be mavatal the time of the keli. In other words, if you'd say there's only a little bit of basar, okay, I'll give you right away a simple case. Let's say you had a brand new pot, what did I say, 500 milliliters of volume. You cooked up 10 milliliters of basar in this pot. Okay, then you emptied it out. And then you filled it up with milk. So what do you have to be mavatal now? We say we have 500 milliliters of tam basar because it's a fleishka pot, because you cooked a little bit amount of basar. It can't possibly have more than the amount of basar you cooked in it. So if you cooked in it, what did I say, 10 milliliters. So if you cook 10 milliliters of basar, there can't be more than 10 milliliters of tam. That's the maximum that could possibly in any situation be. So you're going to need 60 times 10 to be mavatal. You're going to need 600 milliliters to be mavatal. So you're not going to have, because it's only a 500 milliliter pot. So you're going to take a liter pot. Okay, so then as long as you have more than 600, then it's going to have little bashishi. But normally, if it's a regular pot that you cooked in normal circumstances, so we never know how much of the pot absorbed tam basar, and therefore we have to assume, especially it boils, it goes up, it goes down, so we assume that the whole volume of the pot was full of basar. Under normal situations, we assume that, and the klal is that the thickness of the keli is such that you will never have enough in the contents of the keli to have more than 60 times the keli itself. Now, in today's world, that's not necessarily true, because there are different alloys and different sorts of metal that are being used today, where even the days of the Gemara and the days of the Poskim, So it says there's such a thing, a kli rachava, that if it's very thin and it's very wide, it might be possible you could have shishim against the keli. The poskim speak about that. But in today's world, where you have very strong alloys that are very, very thin, it's even more possible. Once had a case in Nevada, you have these tankers that are carrying liquid product. So they're carrying milk, they're carrying chocolate, they're carrying oil, they're carrying different sorts of things. They have to have a hechsher. So what happens? Somebody made a mistake. It was supposed to be a parva run, and they carried the milk. Okay, and let's say it was kavush inside. So it wasn't heated; it was kavush. The kavush came bushel, so it absorbed tam chalav. So, is it possible that the shishi? So we once had such a case, and it was very difficult. It was already a b'diavad case. We had to figure out what happened. So got the specs of the keli, and what happens? These kelim, especially the ones that are running cold, so they have a thin layer of metal, and then they have insulation, and they have another layer of metal. So the actual metal itself that was in contact with the milk was extremely, extremely thin. So we got an engineer and got all the measurements and figured it out, and it was taka way, way less than shisha. Okay, that was an unusual case also because you had another keli outside of that, which was keeping the whole thing, holding it together. So I didn't even know whether that one keli, how stable that keli was on its own. But in today's world, it's more likely to be able to have some sort of bittul b'shishim. But in general, the klal is that we can never assume that you have shishim. As I say, dach me'ed, v'rocha me'ed, you talk on shatech me'yeh shishim. It's very thin, very wide. It is possible you can have shishim. It's unusual. And so too, the case I mentioned, Yedei Akama Bosor Nivla Basir, Yochel Ashar, Shishim Kenegda. You don't have to, normally we have to measure up against the entire pot, the volume of the entire pot. But if you know for a fact that it was less, then you don't need to. It's not a chok without any reasoning behind it. Okay, that's the case when it was a ben yemei. Let's say it was a eina ben yemei. It was eina ben yemei. So you have a fleishik pot. It was used more than 24 hours ago, and a person by mistake cooked milk inside. So now what happens? The taste of the milk goes into the pot. So there's already tam bosor in the pot, but the tam bosor in the pot is a tam pogum. Okay. So now you have in the pot, you have a tam pogum of bosor, and you have a tam meshubach of chalav. But what's with the chalav? So with the chalav, if you have chalav mamish, and then you have a tam pogum of bosor which went into the chalav. So that does not have the power to asur the food. So it ends up that the food is mutter. The milk is okay because the pot was the eina ben yemei, and it's a tam pogum, and it doesn't have the power to asur. We have exceptions to the rule that even eina ben yemei, we'll learn some Sadik Zayin about a dover charif, but in general, a tam pogum is not going to asur anything. The kedera, however, is a problem. Even though it's not bosor b'chalav midiraisa, because the tam pogum of bosor does not have the power to make real bosor b'chalav, but we have a gezerah midirabanan that you're not allowed to use eina ben yemei. So we have tam bosor, so you can't use it for chalav. You have fresh tam of tam chalav, so you can't use it for bosor either. So the milk is fine, but the pot is a problem. Now, since we have tam chalav in the pot and it's tam meshubach, so for sure you can't cook bosor in this pot. That's for sure not. Can you cook chalav in the pot? So you can't cook chalav in the pot either because we have a tam eina ben yemei of bosor, and like we said, l'chatchil you're not allowed to do it. So even though we say neisen tam lepkam is mutter, and the tam bosor is it can't asur anything, but nevertheless that's only b'diavad l'chatchil you're not allowed to use it. You have to kasher it first. What's with cooking up some potatoes inside the pot? What exactly should be the problem with cooking potatoes inside the pot? So we have tam chalav. So you're allowed to make milchik potatoes. You can cook potatoes in milchik kapara ben yemei. What's the problem? You worried about the pot is treif, it's bosor b'chalav, but it's not really bosor b'chalav. Because gezerah with their bun on the eina ben yemei, but it's not real bosor b'chalav. Okay. What are you worried? You're worried about the tam bosor going into the potatoes? With eina ben yemei, so can't asur any food. So what exactly is the problem? So that's Das is Shulchan Aruch Ramah. Hasir aser hein lebishul cholov, hein lebishul basar. So you can't use this pot for milk, like we said before, because it has tam basar in it. Even though it's in a benyam, you can't use it. The hein lebishul basar, and you can't cook basar in it for sure not, because it has a tam meshubach of cholov in it. No problem cooking potatoes. But the Shach points out that later on, the Ramah and Siman Tzadik Dalit, the Ramah brings down a minik to aser it. So Al Pi Din Taka, the Ramah holds its mutter adover parv. But the Ramah says the minik is not to use it. So the Shach points out back over here, the minik that the Ramah brings later on the next Siman, you can't use this pot at all. You can't use it for parv either. You have to kash the pot. The pot is now aser, even though it's in ben yemei, the pot is aser. So these are things which happen, every day. So you have to think through, and often it's something which is counterintuitive. Let's hit the chat over here. Foil pans. What was the question about foil pans? Using them as potatoes?
Is there shishim for a foil pan?
Never measured.
They're
To measure
very
volume
thin.
and all of these things, figuring out shishim is easier said than done. In general, the way you would do it is with displacement. You put something inside. You want to measure the volume of something. You take something which has measurements on the side of it, and then you, like a measuring cup, something like that. You put the keli inside, and you see how much went up, and that's the volume. How much it displaced. So you could figure it out like that. I never measured it. Okay. Now let's say you have a fleishika spoon. This is moving on, by the way. If you notice, very trickily in the upper left-hand corner, it went to Tzadik Dalet, Sif Gimel Dalet. We're going to be coming back to Tzadik Gimel soon, but it's a direct continuation, really, of this din of Ve'ena Ben Yemei. So it's talking over there in Tzadik Dalet about you stuck a kaf. You put the wrong min of a spoon, you put it into a pot of something else, of the opposite type. If it would be a parva thing and it was just a blias, then it's not parnat. That's going to have later on tzaddik. But the first two sifim are not directly negated to this. This is a direct continuation thematically. We skipped two sifim. There's only one sif in tzaddik gimel, but we skipped aleph and base because this is a direct continuation of what happens with the din of Ve'ena Ben Yemei. So you took a fleishika spoon and you put it into the milk. So what happens? So we have three questions. What's with the spoon? What's with the milk? And what's with the pot? Okay, so we have to know what to do. So we want to know, was it a Ben Yemei or was it a Ben Yemei? What's with this spoon? So then somebody calls up, I used the fleishika spoon in the milk of the pot. Did you use it to stir milk? Was it hot? Yes. Use it to stir something parv, or use it just a milk like a pot, or was it mamish milk? It was mamish milk. Okay. Now, when was the last time you used this spoon for hot fleishiks? Okay. Is it a ben yemei or not? So if it's not a ben yemei, what's going to be the din? So we learned already what's the din. Okay, that the kaf does not have it. Okay, we'll go through on the chart here, but just think it through. If it's a ben yemei, so then it's like cooking it in the other min. Who cares whether it's a spoon or a pot? So the tam cholav goes into the kaf. The tam bosor goes from the kaf into the milk, and you have bosor b'chol deiraisa. So the kaf is going to become aser because it absorbed now cholav. And it's a ben yemei, so it's mamish bosor b'cholav, so it's aser. What's with the milk? The milk, you have to see if there's shishim against the kaf. There's shishim negar a kaf, then the milk is going to be mutter. And so to the pot, if it has shishim, it's mutter. And if it doesn't have shishim, then everything's aser. The spoon is aser, the milk is aser, and the pot is aser. Everything's aser. There's no shishim. What if it's ein ben yemei? So Zaina ben Yemei, think it through. What's going to be with the milk? Okay, let's go in the order a bit. What's going to be with the calf?
Also,
Asa? Yeah, Zom Tam Chalav. What's going to be with the milk?
mutter.
Mutter, mutter. Nice and Tam Lafgam. But the other is mutter. What's the din of the pot? So really, that's not such a fair question because we're talking about not for not, but basically you can say the milk is going to be mutter. It's not going to answer the pot either. So asur labashal the Bosor lachalav and lemengarama that it's asur for everything, like we mentioned before. It's exactly the same din we had inside the gimel. It's just not talking about a pot. It's just talking about a spoon instead of a pot. It's the exact same din, just with another tzura. Okay, next case. So we have over here a fleishika spoon went into the milchika pot like it did before. Now we have over here what looks like a parva fruit. Okay, so you stuck this fleishika spoon into the milk. Okay, so that's asur. We know that already from before. And then you took it, and then you before somebody realized, they took this treifa spoon and they put it into the parva fruit to take it out. So what's going to happen over there? What's with the parva tafsha? You have some potatoes, whatever is going on over there. So and we have to know. So if it was the ben yemei, yeah, we got two different time periods over here. We got the time period that between the time you stuck it into the fleishka pot. So first it was fleishik, it was kosher fleishik, and then you'd have to know, was it a ben yemei when you stuck it in the milchika pot? So you have to know. So let's say it was. So now it's asur. Now, later on, you stuck it in the parva pot, and was there 24 hours there? And when do you count the 24 hours from? You count the 24 hours from the absorption of the bosor, or you count it when it became bosor b'chalav? So ima kafayis abbas yema tafshel asur elim came shishim. If you have shishim against the kaf, it's okay. If not, then it's asur. The shaila is exactly when do you count from? Okay, if it was not a ben yemei, okay, according to the Shulchan Aruch, you can use it lachatchila with something parv. And according to the Ramah, like we said before, the Shach brings down that it's mutarab, but the minig is that we go with only use it. B'diavad will be matter. The food that was used, we don't use such a thing lachatchila. But the shaila is, when do we measure from? So let's read the Shulchan Aruch. There's a Gimel Dalet, Siman Sadik Dalet. It's a continuation of the previous dinim that you put the kaf, the fleshik spoon inside the milk. Okay, so we see. Do you have shishim against the kaf? If you have shishim, so the milk is going to be mutter, and the pot is going to be mutter. But the fleshik spoon is asur because it absorbed milk. Bein in bosor, bein in chalav, and you can't use it for either one. The fish hiblu and bosor b'chalav. So it's absorbed bosor b'chalav, and it's a ben yemei, so it's a treifa spoon. Can't use it. But feel b'di'ever aseres im chazru v'tachvua, and even b'di'ever it's going to answer the other foods. If afterwards you stuck it into another food, bein b'bosor, bein b'chalav, calls manshi bas yem. As long as it's a ben yemei, it's a bosor b'chalav spoon. It's going to answer some other food. V'yimein shishim hakol asur ba'ana. And if you don't have shishim, it's asur ba'ana too. I feel like kedera, even the kedera that you stuck it into. Af moter losses will take a peiros at seinin. Kim sheinin enemy gufeis. Okay, this is something else. We're going to get back to this issue. When we say the kedera is asur ba'ana, what is considered to be hana? Okay, we're going to talk about that in the next slide. So let's just keep that question on hold. What is this peiros at saying? Well, they're going to explain it soon. First, we want to figure out the calculation of ben yemei and a ben yemei. So sivdalas in a kap ben yemei. Let's say the spoon was not a ben yemei. It was more than 24 hours before it was used. Hagadeira v'tafshel mutareh. So then the milk is going to be mutar because it was a tam pogum that went in from the spoon into the milk. The kedera, the milk kapara, is also versteht that it's going to be kosher. But kaf also lechatchila. So the kaf, what's with the spoon? It's also lechatchila. Yeah, beinim basar, beinim chalav. Come up and b'diavad ain't neseres kivin shloyo yisavas yemes. B'diavad it's not going to answer something milchik or something par is not going to do it. Obviously, something basar, something fleshik, then it's going to answer. It's a ben yemeh from the milk. Okay, but if it's something else, b'diavad it's not going to answer it. So let's just get clear exactly what we're talking about. So when do you make the calculation? Shach points out this. At the moment you stuck the fleshik spoon into the milk, yesh lahachshiv as a kaf bas yema betech 24 shoys mizman at chiv b'sirach. From the 24 hours when you stuck it inside. Even though it's more than 24 hours from the absorption of the meat, when the spoon became a fleshik spoon, it was called Bosor. Sorry, it's a fleshik spoon. Once you stuck it into the milk, it's not a fleshik spoon anymore. It's something new. It's called Bosor b'chalav. So when we want to know the first stage, when we stuck the fleshik spoon into the milk, did it become asr? We want to know when it absorbed the taste of meat. Now that it became asr, the spoon, and we stuck it into something else, we want to know whether 24 hours when it absorbed meat, when it became flesh, or we want to know 24 hours when it became treif. So the Shach says when it became asr, that's the time you measure. So they made it concrete over here. So let's say Sunday morning, somebody 8 o'clock in the morning, they cook fleshik. Okay. From the eating schedule, but 8 o'clock in the morning, they cooked up a flesh kamach. A bit of washing Shabbos dishes, whatever. 8 o'clock in the morning became fleshik. 16 o'clock, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Bishul Meichel Chalavi, he used it for milchik. Hasir v'tav shel asurim. If you don't have shishim, so then the food's going to become asuri. So let's say he took a kaf, he cooked up the flesh kameichel. Same thing could be with the pot, same thing with the spoon. It doesn't matter what kind of keli it is. Let's continue the case of the Shulchan Aruch here, talking about a kaf. So he put a spoon inside the flesh kameichel. 8 o'clock in the morning, it became flesh. Then he took it and he stuck it into the milk at 4 o'clock. So now it became Bosor b'chalav. Now, 7 o'clock the next morning, so it's l'chol days a ben yemeh, right? It's less than 24 hours. Tuesday morning at 7 a.m., okay, he sticks it into food, so he used the treif spoon. So if he doesn't have shishim, that food is going to become asr. Okay, but now let's say he did it at 1 o'clock on, I said Tuesday, I meant Monday. Okay, so at 8 a.m. Sunday, it became flesh. At 4 p.m. Sunday, it became treif. Now it's 1 p.m. on Monday. So it's more than 24 hours from the time it absorbed the meat, but it's less than 24 hours from the time it came treif. Is that called a ben yemeh or ain't a ben yemeh? It's called a ben yemeh because we counted from the time it became Bosor b'chalav. Bosor b'chalav is a new matzias, and I really hope we get to it today. At the end of this shiur is explained, I mentioned a few times parenthetically, the big chiddush of the Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Bosor b'chalav that he mentions in the Hagon, Hilchos Pesach, Sim Tov Nun Aleph. So this helps us understand it because Bosor b'chalav is a new matzias. It's a shem chodesh. You're creating a new isser here. It's not just a problem. We want to know when it absorbed meat because then the meat, which was a ben yemeh, and the milk was a ben yemeh, made a problem. So we want to set the date from the time that the meat was a ben yemeh. Now the meat's no longer a ben yemeh, so why should it ask for anything? No, because at 1 o'clock it became Bosor b'chalav. We got a new isser. This is nothing to do that the flesh and then the Bosor and the chalav were too close together. We have a brand new matzias. It's got a new name. Before it was called Bosor and chalav. Now it's called Bosor b'chalav. So you count the 24 hours from the time that it became Bosor. Question: what about if you cook meat in a milchik pot that has not been yem with a fleshik spoon that has not been yem with a fleshik color? I'm gonna have to answer this later. I'm sorry. I'm sure it's a good question, but in the middle of trying to finish the Indian, I'm sorry. Please accept my apologies. We'll get to it. That's a shame. Okay. So when we said, as I mentioned, you should keep in your memory bank the issue that when we said the pot is also ba'ana. What do you mean the pot is also ba'ana? And we discussed this before by Tipus Cholov that fell in the pot. What does it mean when you say a pot is osir? Pot is osir. Pot is treif. What do you mean the pot is treif? The handles are treif. Or the taste in the pot is treif. The metal of the pot. So I mentioned parenthetically, you get it later on. The Simchat Ches and Tarubis is a real place for the discussion. But is it possible chaticha nas and nevela of a keli? Can a keli be nas and nevela? So we say the keli is nas and nevela, but do you mean the blia in the keli? Since we assume that the whole keli is full of tam, and that was nas and nevela, so we say the whole keli is nas and nevela. But the keli, the metal is nas and nevela. You can make metal into nevela. So we brought the photos over there that Hagol, if you're Efshel Hafrid, not Efshel Hafrid, Cheres, you can't get it out. Other things you can't get it out. Okay. When we say we're ashering the keli, you're ashering the keli. You're allowed to sit on the keli. The keli is also banot. Keli is also banot. You can sit on the keli. Sitting on is getting hanot. But what's the getting hanot from what? You're getting a keli is not also banot. Bosor b'chol is also. So this keli absorb bosor b'chol. So that means you can't get enough from the keli, or can't get enough from the bosor b'chol of the keli. Okay? And the short answer to that is you can't get hana from the tam that's in the keli. That's what we mean when we say it's asr. So Meichlam is bashal b'sir b'seichtes. The Rabbi Vesem shows miblias habosor b'chol nesar b'chil bana. So if you use this pot within 24 hours, so the tam went into the food and it answered it, and now it's also banal. Okay. The kelev, even the kalbech hefker, you can't give it to your dog. Then for sure it's hano, you're saving money. But even that any hano whatsoever should come up with a dog of hefker. I mentioned this before. So even that is that such a hano is also us. But can you use it to serve fruit? The keli is also by the pot's also by no. Getting hano. You're serving fruit. You're serving cold fruit to people. Is that a problem? So you're not getting any benefit from the bosor b'chol. Mutal anich b'peiros. I call shim b'tzeinen acher. That's what the Mechaber said before, yeah? That's mutal b'peiros and b'tzeinen. So we said at the end of Sif Gimel. Also by no, I feel like a day, ach mutal lasis l'teicha peiros b'tzeinen. Kivin she'einen nesta migufa is. You're going to get hana from the bosor b'chol. When you put the fruit inside, you're getting hana from the keli. You're not getting hana from the bosor b'chol in the keli. Mutal artiach b'mayim. Further, can you boil up water for washing clothing, for washing your feet? And then there's tam bosor b'chol is going into the water. Yeah, but are you getting hana? If you're washing your clothing, the clothing has hana that there's bosor b'chol in there. Tam bosor b'chol. So you're allowed to boil up the water as long as it's not l'tzerech achil or shti. If you're going to eat it or drink it, so then you're going to get hana from the tam. Okay. So therefore, it's allowed. The Alter Rebbe brings Hilchos Pesach and Simon Tofnon. The Alter Rebbe is even matter to use a chametz keli to wash clothing. Because the chametz is also by hana, but you're not getting hana from the tam chametz. You're getting hana from the keli. What's the keli? We say the keli is also. That's not what we mean. We say the keli is also. Okay? Nevertheless, there's an inyan not to use it by from kavua. It's a sort of thing that you're allowed to do, but a person shouldn't make a habit out of it. Do you have to kasher it right away, or you allowed to leave it in the keli? Are we worried that a person might come to use this keli? So the fact is that if a person would use the keli, what would be the din? It's going to be Eina ben Yemen. If he's going to leave it once more than 24 hours. There's no chiyuv to kasher a keli right away. However, Roy, chiyuv mamish, but Roy lasamne, it's proper that you should put some sort of siman on it, some sort of marking, some sort of sign, put it in a place. People are not going to use it. So we are concerned, since l'chatchila you're not allowed to use it, you have to put it in such a place. Yeah. Are you allowed to sell it? You have to sell the keli. So you sell the keli. So you're getting hana from the keli. The keli is also bana. But weiter, you're getting a bigger price for the keli because it has tam basa b'chalav in it. Somebody cares that there's tam basa b'chalav in it. They're paying extra. Maybe they'll pay less. They're Jewish. They'll pay less. Okay, but they're paying for the keli. They're not paying for the tam. Nevertheless, since the whole keli is asbano and they're buying the tam too, so then there are achreinim. It's a machlekes whether you're allowed to sell it, and that's a sort of hana which is allowed or not allowed. That's it. Okay. Behind, if it's a short question, we'll take it. Pouring fruit, not turned by kedusha. So the truth is there are. You'll see in the Neisa Kalim, those that want to answer a dover lach. A dover lach, they want to answer it, but not really because of kovush. Just because the fruit is wet, that's not enough to make it kovush. It would have to be sitting in liquid in order to make it kovush. It's not enough to make it kovush, but those that want to say dover lach. You're going to put in something asher, then it's going to need hadacha. You remember the whole discussion, the beginning of Tzadik Aleph, but something that's going to, whether you're allowed to put food into a treifa keli. So as we discussed at the beginning of Tzadik Aleph. Now we have the din of the cover. So the truth is that before doing this part over here, I have to fill in. It's not covered in the Chaveris, but there's a little piece of the Ramah in Siman Tzadik Base that was not covered. It's not covered in the slides. And this was, we had Heibav Zayin about the Tipas of Chalav, and we spoke about Shasat Chak, about how to get the food out of the pot, and do you have to pour right away, or do you wait, and so on and so forth. And we had this long Ramah over here. Then the Ramah started talking about things that were flowing. It was flowing out of the pot, and it went to hit the other one, Tapagovar, and there was a whole kiluach, and it went along the karka. Different cases over there that Ramah discussed. Then the Ramah, right over here, you see 4 lines from the bottom of the Ramah. The Ramah starts talking about the cover. Tipa nafelas al gabe kisoy hagedera. Make this bigger. So you have a drop that fell on the cover. So Ramah says, Dina kinaflo gabe kedera negadaretiv. It has the same din as negadaretiv. But think about that for a second. You have a pot. Let's say the pot is half full. So if you have a tipa's chal that fell on the side of the pot, if it fell on the bottom half of the pot, it's called negadaretiv, and you say it's batul b'shish. That's what we spoke about last week. And if it falls on top, hey, it's a whole question. Rottenberg, you need 3,600 times. Or did it spread out? How much did it spread out? Did it go right up to the level? So on and so forth. Okay, why is that? Because the top of the pot is empty. It's not touching any food. Now along comes the kisui. So the kisui, which is closer to the food, the cover or the top half of the walls of the pot? It would seem that if you take out a ruler, that the top half of the walls is closer to the food than the kisui. So it falls on the kisui, what should be the din? The Ramah says, like it fell negative. Why is that? So the reason is because since it's cooking, like we had by the din of near of a kisui, that it mixes everything up because it's going up and down like this. Not on the sides, but up and down yet. Therefore, the Ramah, that's only after it started boiling. Because then the zayah comes out of the food and it's constantly coming up. And it reaches all the way up to the cover. When it comes down to the reitev, so it's mamish, all the things mixed up. It's mamish fel keneged the reitev. Lashon Ramah is very interesting. Bavorin, an issue the Mashal brings up that the Neisa Kalim mentioned is that okay, so there's zayah coming up, but if you would say how much of the surface, when it fell neged harativ. So the harativ in the bottom half of the pot, how much of the surface is in contact with the food? 100%. The things in the harativ. So the harativ is totally in contact with the walls. When you have zayah coming up, zayah doesn't have the same density as the liquid itself. It's only zayah. So make a concrete, it's not so accurate, but just to understand. So let's say if you have the liquid is like this, everything's covered like this. If it's zayah, so maybe the zayah, there's some zayah coming out like this, but there's spaces in between over there. Okay, so let's say theoretically speaking, you got the zayah from the flesh kapat coming up like this, like with 4 fingers, like this, but it's not touching in between. Let's say the tipus challah fell on top, but here's the kisui kedek, and the tipus challah fell over here. So if it fell over here, who says that this zayah is going to be able to be mevatel? Why is that neged harativ? It's one stretch to say the neged hazayah is like neged harativ. No, naniach. But who told you? How are you so sure that it fell neged hazayah? Yeah, there's a bunch of zayah over there, but it spreads out the same way the liquid spread out. That it's like 100% covered. Who says? That's what Marshall says. Marshall says, how can you compare the 2 cases? Lamaisa, we do compare the 2 cases, but it's not so partial because we discussed once upon a time the whole idea of kashering with steam. So it's a big machlek as a person. Can you kasher something with steam? Because if the thing was beleya from actual liquid, and then you're going to kasher it with zayah, which is not actual liquid, who says it's good enough? Who says kabbalah chapolta? There are those that go even further. You say, let's say it absorbed through steam. So then kabbalah chapolta, kasher with steam. Yeah, but who says? Maybe the steam the first time, it didn't cover the entire surface and there was certain parts not covered. And then the second steam came and it kasher with steam and hit the different parts. So it's not so posh. The big machlek is this whole thing. That's what he said before in Siman Sadik base about kisui kedei. Okay, but halacha we hold it like the Ramah says, and it's as if it went keneged harativ. But now we have another issue with this kisui kedei in Siman Sadik Gimel. So we're going back because we just followed through from Sadik Gimel to Sadik Dalet of Gimel Dalet about the din of Ein ben Yemin. Now we're going back and learning the rest of the Ramah. It's a very long Ramah on Sadik Gimel. Which it looks like we're not going to finish today. In any case, we'll learn as much as we learn. V'din kisa kedera, the Ramah says, kedin kedera atzma. Remember, the Ramah, this is in Siman Sadik Gimel, but the Ramah was talking about cooking, let's say, milk in a flesh kapat, which was Ein ben Yemin. So what's the din of the kisa kedera? Let's say you put a cover on. Let's say you put a milchik cover on a flesh kapat. I got a call yesterday around supper time. A woman wanted to cook, wanted to serve a family supper, and she put a flesh cover on a milchik kapat. So I was going to thank her. I said, I have a shiur tomorrow night. I'm going to be talking about that. Okay. So what do you have to find out? You have to find out what's going on. It's parv. It was milchik, it was fleshik, it was ben yemin, it was ein ben yemin. So the din is din kisa kedera, din kedera atzma. But then comes along this chumrah, which is very puzzling. The Muslim going to say it's a chumrah b'lei tam. We don't understand this chumrah. But there's such a chumrah. V'yesh machmirim b'kisui. That those that are extra strict on a cover, blamer the afal pi she'eina ben yemei. Dina kilo hayabanye. Covers are different. Covers are different. Why covers different? Covers are different. So ain't a banyayim, we treat it like a banyayim. B'kein neigin b'miktas mekanis. That's mekanis. Now there are quotes this that there are places that there brings down like the minute quoted by the Ramah. That there are those the machma treat it like a banyayim. B'kein ani neig b'fnei mipnei minik. The Ramah says I am machma like this because of the minute. Well, chumra b'lei tam. It's a chumrah, but there's no reason for this. Ramah doesn't say. With all discussion, maybe this reason, maybe that reason. So we see Mashal and Nesekalim bring down, it says that if it comes to covers have different shapes. The emphasis is it's hard to clean a cover. When it comes time for Agalas Kalim, make it divided with the Kasha Kalim before Pesach. So the covers, sometimes there's crevices there and it's hard, there are little corners, and there are places where the food gets stuck, it's hard to get the mamashas out. So those who want to say that that ends up being a problem. Those who want to be makasher with this chumrah. And again, so he says, even if you're in a place where they keep such a minhag, but if you have another reason to be lenient, another tzad lahater, Hefsed meruba, you need the food for Shabbos, you don't have time to cook other food. Yesh lahater imena kisa benyeme. If it's a benyeme, you treat it like any benyeme, k'mei b'ktera atzma, you'll be a matter of food. You're going to allow it. Yeah. The mashal sheyesh laachmer rak b'kisa yim makum tzar shekosel on a case. If it has thin areas that it's hard to clean, so then you should be machmer kilapam nisharim sham tipus mamoshes ma bishul akedim. So then you're not dealing. Again, it's obvious, but just to reiterate, when we say Eina ben Yeme is Neisen Tam Levgam, we're talking about the time that's in the cave. We're not talking about food. If there's remnants of food over there, that's called leftovers. That's not called Neisen Tam Levgam. You have leftover food, it's sitting for 24 hours, it's Neisen Tam Levgam. Who says? Food does not become Neisen Tam Levgam. I mean, eventually become Neisen Tam Levgam. It becomes spoiled. Okay, but that has nothing to do with it. Then we're talking about Neisen Tam Levgam, we're talking about Tam Blue and a Keli. Okay, and if there's some sort of mamashas over there, it's a different story. So Sir Chalad Shahuna Chalav Mechsa Bosor Sheina Ben Yeme Im Chelik Tzah Shdinik Ben Yeme Keneged Mamasharim Shishim. So if you want to see that there's Shishim, so we say like this: what's the chumrah? You're going to treat the kisui like it's a ben yeme. Yeah, that's the minhag that the Ramah brought. Then the Mashal comes along and he says, maybe there's mamashas there. So that's why you have to be machmer. Now, even if it's a ben yeme, you look and see it, the shishim. So how are you going to measure shishim? You need shishim against those places that we're worried about mamashas, or you need shishim against the whole kisei hakdera. So the Taz says, only the parts that you're worried about, but the Shach is going to call a kisei. You have to go against the whole kisei. Once you got a place, there's this place, it's that place, you're going to measure this place, you're going to measure that place. It's impossible to measure. So the Shach wants shishim against the entire kisei, which is going to probably be pretty unusual that such a thing should happen. Yeah. Okay, Rabbi say it's 9:30. So we have a little bit left, but there's always next week. So Mitzvah Hashem, we will finish our discussion of Kisui and Eina Ben Yeme and discuss the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. Mitzvah Hashem next week. Okay, any questions on what we covered? Tiring, huh? I hope everybody's doing Chazara. You don't do Chazara, you gotta do Chazara. Do Chazara right away. Now do Chazara. Okay, if you can't do it now, do it tomorrow morning. You have to learn Rambam, what do you have to do? Okay? But the quicker you do the Chazara, take out the Chaveres, go over what we learned.
I thought we were Yotzer Rambam already from 2 weeks ago, and
with the Shulchan Aruch is this.
Yeah.
Yeah, sooner when we get to Meichol Sasuras, maybe we'll be Makavan and Sashoyis. Learn the right halachas. But you know what ends up when you learn Shulchan Aruch, you learn Rambam, you learn one halach and Rambam. You don't learn 3 broken. You don't even get close to 1 parak.
When we speak about the kaf, and we say that the 24 hours is from the time that it was Berel, Bosor, and Chalal. Do you need shishim against the chalav, against the Bosor and the chalav, which is Belua? Let's say you have a kazayas Bosor and a kazayas chalav.
Great question. The din of how much of the kaf you need to be mevatel is the beginning of the simon that we skipped.
Okay. Because
So
even though
that's next week's topic.
yeah.
That's next week's topic. How much of the kaf? Ad Mosai. That's the main shaila is Ad Mosai.
No, meaning let's say you know that there's two kazesim, you're gonna be mevastal against two kazesim, right? So you need 120 kazesim.
Wait. Yeah, it tracks good. Tracks good, but we'll go into it. Okay, I gotta catch my riff. Sag es unter Rabbi saying. Go to.
Shikoyach.
Shikoyach, shikoyach.
Go to.